holding a revolutionary book in your hands. It is meant to restore the truth in the conscience of modern mankind, further generations concerning the contribution of Africans to development of the civilization. Let me illustrate the present-day situation in the world with the example of a real story from Argentina. Eva Palais inherited $40 million from her missing father. It took her 9 years of court battles and exhumation of her grandmother's body. As a result, a retired Argentinian housemaid, Eva Palais, has lawfully inherited the wealth of her father. She suspected she could be a daughter of Baron Rufino Otero, but her mother died without revealing this secret. To find out the truth, it was necessary to compare Eva's DNA with the Baron's. Unfortunately, it was impossible, because shortly after his death in 1983 his grave was opened and his body replaced with someone else's. Officials had to perform exhumation of Baron Otero's mother to compare the DNAs and confirm Eva's origins. As a result, they found the blood relation between the landlord and his misbegotten daughter. The Baron never had children with his wedded wife. Eva had to go to court to inherit the wealth of her biological father. Previously, this wealth was granted to Dario Arenas, the nephew of the Baron's wife. After 9 years of court proceedings, the truth was restored and Eva inherited her father's wealth. A similar situation took place in regard to Africans. Reading this book page after page, you will find incredibly large-scale achievements of civilization made by black people. Be ready to face the fact that these are not just local lands and wealth of a baron, but you will be overwhelmed by the level of development and discoveries made by Africans, which is capable of making them a leading nation when it comes to development of the global civilization. Creation of many inventions, development of numerous aspects of life of a modern man, both in material and spiritual fields, have been assigned to groups of people who are not actually involved. In the same way as the Baron's wealth had been granted to his wife's nephew but then returned to his legitimate heiress. This book will restore the hereditary right of black people to the achievements that their predecessors created. Please note that Eva had to go a long and hard way in the court to finally see the truth come out. So be ready for a battle of a comparable scale. Specific facts, historical, archaeological, geographical and all kinds of documentary facts and evidence will take you through a series of court meetings, where we will examine the key role played by Africans in creating and developing the European civilization. We would also like to draw a parallel between the low social status of the woman from the example story and that of many black people. One of the goals of this book is to help black people regain their lost identity and recreate that feeling that comes with being masters of their destinies. First of all, this book is meant for the global community, representatives of all races, nations, ethnic groups and so on. It is meant to put an end to racism. You can use it as a gift for your acquaintances whom you want to develop an objective view of the abilities proved by the history and life of ordinary and at the same time extraordinary people of African origin. This book is an antidote and a vaccine for racism that we have to inject into the veins of the global community and people of every country. This book is an example, a case in precedent. This is the name of the decision of the highest judicial body in a particular case, which is subsequently mandatory for the courts in the resolution of similar cases. Therefore, this book of investigation is relevant for all countries and regions without exception, as it serves as an illustrative example in restoring the true role of various groups of people classified by ethnic grounds and in establishing harmonic coexistence, mutual respect of different groups of people living in the same territory. Almost all achievements of black people cited in this book are largely unknown to most people living. The very fact that you are reading this book is already historical. Therefore, imagine yourself, my dear reader, among the jurors at a court session, where you will have to make a crucial decision. Listen attentively. Not every aspect will be covered. I repeat once again, not every aspect of the contribution Africans made to the creation and development of European, and generally global civilization, but a number of the basic elements of civilization. The fateful events behind which the black people were standing, which are described, will be sufficient for you as a respected reader to be able to form your opinion on this issue. We will see the truth of the following. 1. Africans are ancestors of civilization. 2. Africans created the greatest civilization of the ancient world. 3. Africans created key civilizations all over the world. 4. Africans were the first to discover America and develop the American civilization. 5. Africans created and/or influenced in a determinative way all global religions. 6. Africans created the European civilization. 7. Africans ruled the Roman Empire. 8. Africans created Russian literature and helped form national literatures in European countries. 9. Africans brought enlightenment and spirituality to Europe. 10. Africans invented metallurgy. 12. Africans created science. 13. Africans created astronomy and developed it to an impressive degree. 14. Africans created high-tech construction and general construction as we know it. Africans determined the scientific and technological progress of the world and many other things. It will be a revolutionary and incredibly interesting experience. Did Africans bring civilization to Europe? Yes, they did. You will not have a slightest doubt of that after you read the book. And not only to Europe. In the literal sense of the word, Africans brought civilization to almost all corners of the planet Earth, no matter how paradoxical it may sound for some people. But why are the title and one of the main accents of the book focused specifically on their contribution to European civilization? Firstly, at the moment the European civilization is considered a key, exemplary and unmatched one. Therefore, it is very important to highlight the unique role of Africans in its formation. Secondly, it is the Europeans, for the most part, who stand behind the need to write such a book. Why? At the moment, the predominant image captured in the public attention is Africans who are poor and backward in all matters, to whom the Europeans brought the benefits of civilization. This image has been formed by a multitude of books about history, written for at least the last 500 years. Which often pursued the goal of glorifying Europeans and devaluating the merits of people from many other parts of the world, particularly Africa and Asia. In reality, everything was actually the other way around. Civilization did not begin in Europe, and the rest of the world did not wait in the dark shadows for the Europeans to enlighten them. In fact, the people who would later be called Europeans received civilization and culture from Africa and Asia, the Middle and Far East. The African civilization preceded the European one by thousands of years, and Europe itself was deep in ignorance until black people brought their gifts of civilization at different times in history. The tragedy came when the 16th century Europeans started ending towards Africa and Asia, turning them into colonies containing most of the world's population. As a consequence, the scientific world was also colonized, especially history. History was written and rewritten repeatedly to ignore Africa's decisive role and proof that Europeans were the only ones to create everything pertaining to civilization. It was necessary to prove the insignificance of black people and justify the crimes of that time, the seizure of foreign territories, resources, colonization and slave trade necessary for the implementation of large-scale plans of Europeans. That is why we will concentrate on this vector of civilization development from Africa to Europe. Nevertheless, we will highlight, as much as possible within a small format of the book, the phenomenal role played by Africans in other continents. In this book, the terms Negro or black will be used along with African. In this case, they are not meant to humiliate but are used as the words applied by the cited authors. Another unique feature is that this book is co-authored by an African and a European. Whoever you could be, dear reader, let us take prejudice away and have an objective look at the greatness of people lucky to be born with dark skin. Every person has the right to know the history of their nation, to admire its merits, and be respectful to achievements of other nations. Let this book bring the balance to evaluation of the role played by different nations in developing the civilization. and let it help people to have good attitudes towards people of different nationality and identity. Sunday Adelaide, Nigeria, Ukraine. Practical advice on reading this book. This book can change your life. Dear reader, you are holding a book the name of which got you interested, which means this topic is relevant for you. We often decide to change something in ourselves when what we have read impressed us, but a new day comes and we forget the good intentions. For the haste of everyday life takes its toll. Here are some practical recommendations to make sure that reading this book will not end up as accumulation of another portion of knowledge. 1. Read this book several times. Do not hurry and read thoughtfully. Ask yourself when and where you may be able to use this information. Study the book carefully and analyze your reaction. 2. Read aloud. Reading aloud will allow the unleashing of the power hidden in every word and bring it into your life. Every word you see is as important as every word you hear. A pronounced word has a wave nature, therefore, it has an influencing effect on all surrounding objects and subjects when it sounds. Therefore, words matter. Do not neglect the power of words. Do not let the strength go past while it can alter your life and circumstances in your life almost physically. 3. Underline and make notes. While reading this book, keep your pen or highlighter at hand. Underline separate text lines and paragraphs. This simple action will reinforce 3 times your faculty of retention. Write down your own thoughts and make marginal notes. Let this book become your own book. Underlining is meant to make a book much more interesting and help you to review it faster in the future. 4. Reread the underlined fragments. Thanks to underlining and marking, you'll be able to review the most essential questions and fragments of this book. To get the result from reading it is necessary to look through it as often as you can. Let marked fragments inspire you to improve your life. As humans, we have an amazing ability to forget things. The only way to keep the necessary information in our memory is to go back to it again and again. 5. Use the principles you have learned immediately. A person cannot be taught anything. Anyone can only learn something by their own efforts. It means that learning is an active process. We learn best what we do practically. If you want to master the principles given in this book, use them as often as possible and whenever possible. If you don't practice, you will forget them quickly. What is used in practice will remain in your memory. 6. Give more priority to the things you are learning. At the end of every chapter you will find the golden truths containing all essential thoughts that you have met during the entire chapter. Besides, you'll find tests created with a purpose to assess yourself and your skills, as well as the practical tasks that will help you to put into practice the things you have read. They are not meant just to be read within 24 hours in order to obtain the highest result and take advantage of the tasks. Otherwise, seized by the fuss of everyday life, you will keep your destiny away again and all the changes you expect so much will not take place in your life. From my many years' experience of working with people, I know that we often fulfill similar tasks for the sake of appearance only in order to get a mark. But you are not at school where you could get away with this simple trick. It concerns your own life, and completion of these tasks is essential for your life to change. That is why you should take the task seriously, because that is for you, and not for the author of the book. Find a quiet place where nobody can disturb you in completing these tasks. Perhaps, it will be a time when you are home alone or at night when everyone is asleep. Make sure you reflect upon the chapter you have read and upon all the points you have marked. Remember your decisions and write down all following steps. Do not fail to lay down definite time periods to fulfill what you have planned and determine the restrictions you will impose on yourself. It will help you not to put planned steps towards the alteration of your life on the long finger. Find a person to whom you can be accountable about your decision, who will remind you about it, or just a partner for self-development. Write down the date when you started reading this book blank. Let this date become a crucial moment in your life. Advice on completing practical tasks. Attention! The practical tasks given after each chapter are not meant just for reading. You should work on them in order to attain the necessary changes. The word practical in the headline of this chapter is used just because of this reason. We often fulfill similar tasks for the sake of appearance only in order to get a mark. May I remind you that you are not at school, it concerns your own life. Completion of these tasks is essential for you and not for the author of the book. Be serious and responsible. To get a maximal effect from completing these tasks, I recommend that you 1. Complete them within 24 hours after reading. By postponing it, you are running a risk of missing your destiny and your success. 2. Work on the practical tasks in silence and calm surroundings. Find a quiet place where nobody can disturb you in completing these tasks. Perhaps it will be a time when you are home alone or at night when everyone is asleep. 3. Make sure you reflect upon the chapter you have read and upon all the points you have marked. Recollect the decisions you have taken and write down your subsequent actions. 4. Do not fail to lay down definite time periods to fulfill what you have planned and determine the restrictions you will impose on yourself. It will help you not to put planned steps towards the alteration of your life on the long finger. 5. Find a person to whom you can be accountable about your decision, who will remind you about it, or just a partner for self-development. Advice on completing the tests. Tests given after each chapter will help you to analyze yourself and see your actual position. It's a kind of diagnosis. Any illness is cured after its original cause is determined. So these tests can determine not only the physical cause of an illness but the spiritual one too. However, it will require you to take some effort, self-analysis, reflection and honest answers. By doing it for yourselves and giving most honest answers to every question or statement, you will find your weak points and will start working on eliminating or strengthening them. For every question or statement of the test you should mark one answer only. There are points given in brackets next to each answer or statement. The amount of points you score will determine how much you tend to recognize monoculture in your life. These tests are meant to change your personality and are in no way designed to humiliate you. After all, for each of us there are many things to be improved. Chapter 1. Africans created the first and later the greatest civilization of the ancient world. Africa is the cradle of all nations, including those of Europe. Dear reader, let us examine a portion of scientific data proving that the first people lived in Africa, and all other nations originated from them. Most scientists come to believe that origins of mankind can be traced to Africa. For example, the British scientist Albert Churchward (1852–1925) notes that the first members of the human family appeared in Central Africa. These early Africans moved to different corners of the planet, and accordingly acquired the differences which today can be found in people living in different parts of the world. Thus, those who remained in the tropical and equatorial regions remained dark-skinned. Those who settled in temperate zones lost some of their pigmentation, and their skin acquired a paler shade. 1. Archaeologist Eric Higgs (1908–1976) from Cambridge University conducted a study on the migration of ancient people, and claimed that the first men in Europe came to this continent from Central and Eastern Africa about 250,000 years ago. According to Professor Chester Chart of the University of Wisconsin, early people who left Africa and settled the rest of the world followed the four prehistoric routes from Africa to Europe. 2. Charles Finch III points to the available facts that the first Europeans left Africa 40,000 to 50,000 years ago and underwent a local evolution during the last ice age, as a result of which their skin changed from a dark African to a pale Europeoid type. Fossils of these ancient Africans were recovered in the cave of Grimaldi, Monaco, and their statues and images depicting African-type Khoisan women dated back to 440,000. 50,000 years ago were found in large numbers within the range of thousands of miles from France to the Russian part of the Caucasus. Scientists are no longer surprised by the now indisputable fact established both by physical anthropology and molecular biology, that the entire human race, in Europe, Asia or America, is a branch from the original line of humanity in Africa. It is believed that they appeared there about 300,000 years ago and began to migrate to other parts of the world about 100,000 years ago. Point 3. The greatest anthropologist Runoko Rashidi, born in 1954, also confirms that tens of thousands of years ago Africans became the first inhabitants of Europe. DNA research and anthropology have confirmed this. For example, the discovery of dozens of figurines across Europe, depicting a woman with steatopygia, leads not only to the conclusion that Africans of Nam-Khoi type inhabited prehistoric Europe, but also to the fact of worshipping a black woman. Steatopygia determines a type of constitution, genetically inherent in some peoples of Africa, where there is a significant accumulation of fat on the buttocks, especially in women. Point 4. Most of the contemporaries of the naturalist Charles Darwin (1809–1882) were inclined to believe that Asia was the birthplace of mankind. But Darwin himself was inclined to believe that Africa was the cradle of mankind. Point 5. Scientists also note that the genes of black people are not recessive, as in other races. This means that blacks can genetically give rise to other races, while no race can reproduce a black man. So, if we agree that Adam was the first person, then it can be argued that he was a black man. According to the Bible, Adam was created out of the dust of the earth. In the book by Catherine McGee-Livers, there is an explanation for this phrase, Aphar min ha-Adamah, from the Hebrew language. The word earth, Adhamah, is formed from the word Adam, which stands for black soil. And the very word, Adam, man, can be understood as dark, or black. In Akkadian poetry, one of the most ancient Semitic languages, Adam means black-headed. Point 6. Another evidence from the field of genetics that humanity came from black people was the information shown in 2009 on the British BBC channel in a series of documentaries called The Incredible Human Journey. In this series, it was revealed that all people living today came from Africa. Moreover, it turns out to be possible to link all living people to one African black woman in the past. She was called the Eve from Africa. Today this position is supported by scientists and is called the hypothesis of mitochondrial Eve. Since the so-called mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through the maternal line, all living people obtained this DNA from this African person. This hypothesis was first published by the team of biochemists of the University of California in 1987 in the journal Nature. According to more recent estimates, the mitochondrial Eve lived about 140,000 years ago in eastern Africa. Point 7. So, we have proven that the first people were black Africans, and that other nations, in particular the European ones, descended from these Africans. You can easily imagine your black ancestors, even if you are not a black person yourselves. Now if some people consider Africans to be inferior and second grade, then how could they give rise to geniuses in other nations? Before we turn to the fact that Africans created the first civilization, let's consider the description of the African influence in the Stone Age as given in the book The Contribution of Africans. Point 8. As it was remarkably noted, the hunting-throwing weapon, bolas, stone knives, canoe paddles, spears, harpoons, bows and arrows, wind guns, hammers, axes, all these were originally invented by Africans and are the result of the first application of human strength. Today's artillery pieces, long-range missiles, ship engines, automatic hammers, gas engines, and even kitchen meat choppers and upholstery button hammers have their roots in the prehistoric use of strength by Africans. Africans gave humanity the first mechanism. They had a burning stick. Thanks to it, a person had a fire at any time. Thanks to it, they could light a fire anywhere. Thanks to it, the ancient Africans could fry food. Every time we light a candle, every time we take a bath with hot water, every time we cook food on a gas stove, our use of fire simply continues the process started by the ancient Africans. Fire control. Knives, hammers, axes were the first tools of African labor. But it is the production of tools that distinguishes man from other creatures. Naturally, these ancient Africans were the first to discover how to build red huts. They should be the first because for hundreds of thousands of years they were the only people on the earth. They invented manufacture of rough baskets and weaving, how to create watertight earthen vessels tempered on fire. In cold weather, they found out that the skin of dead animals was capable of warming them. They even made leather covers for their feet. It was thanks to their efforts that later the production of clothing and footwear was created. We owe much more to the ancient Africans than we could think. They tamed dogs. They used sticks for digging to get edible root. They discovered grains as a meal, learned how to store and cook them. They learned about the fermentation of certain foods and liquids left in containers. Thus, mankind is obliged to Africans for dogs who are our friends and protectors. For shovels that are used by farmers. For the cereal we eat for breakfast. For fermented drinks which many people drink. For the woven garments we wear. For the blankets that keep us warm at night. For the dishes in which we bake or cook food, and in general for the very process of boiling water, which we use every time we cook eggs, pasta or meat. Canoes gave people the opportunity to travel farther and farther from home. For many centuries, canoes had been used to go down along the Nile and Congo rivers and go up along smaller rivers and streams. It was in this way that Africa was originally settled. On the basis of the wind gun of the ancient Africans, other devices were subsequently developed according to the same principle. This includes windbags and bellows, a device for air pressing, a bamboo piston pump, a rifle, a pistol, a revolver, an automatic rifle, a machine gun, and even industrial guns that blow out grains. African hunters often chopped game. There are present-day Stone Age images of bones, hearts and other organs in animals. These were the first steps in the field of anatomy. Ancient Africans conducted a thorough study of the animal and plant life. Thanks to their knowledge of animals, livestock breeding became possible, and their knowledge of plants gave humans agriculture. The organizational forms of family, clan and tribe were first formed in Africa. Even back then, they understood family relations in the way we understand them now. The clan and tribe created group unity and strength, and it was in these groups that religious practices and beliefs began. When the great leader of the tribe died, he became a guide for his tribe. Respect for him, honoring his tribal ministry and efforts in trying to appeal to him became a form of worship. The first formal training was the transmission of oral traditions during the ceremony of joining an African tribe. These ceremonies were conducted by people who practiced medicine. From among such people, priests later appeared. African ritual dances became the basis for many subsequent forms of dance. Music already existed in prehistoric Africa. The musical instruments of that time were reed pipe, single-string instruments, drums, pumpkin rattle, blocks of wooden and hollow pads. African artists brought drawings and sculpture to common culture of the mankind. Therefore, in studying the development of peoples, it is necessary to take into account that the history of mankind is a kind of a relay race. It is impossible to bring a wand to the finish line, without someone else transferring it to you before that. It is impossible to go all the way on one's own. We did not give birth to life, we did not give birth to civilization, but we picked up the slack. So you should be grateful to the ancient Africans, who had been running with all their might so that other nations could become champions. Ethiopia, the first civilization in the world. Now let us move to the first civilization in the world created by Africans. To begin with, let us find out what civilization is. First of all, civilization is a form of culture. In its turn, culture is patterned behavior which the individual learns, either through instruction or imitation, from other members of his social group. Culture consists of all forms of human behavior except those found among the apes. Among the forms of behavior common to man and ape are the following. 1. Impulses toward mating and parenthood. 2. Impulses to play, hunt, and explore. 3. Tendencies to imitate and show off, to attack when angry, and to take flight when frightened. 4. Desire for companionship. Hence the above are classified properly as non-cultural activities. The forms of behavior specifically restricted to man and which are truly cultural activities are: 1. Growing of crops. 2. Domestication of animals. 3. Cooking. 4. Weaving of clothes. 5. The use of language, which may be defined as the expression of definite ideas by means of the larynx, lips, and tongue. In its turn, civilization is nothing more or less than literate culture. 9. A society is civilized only if it contains scholars and scientists. The scholar consolidates and clarifies the knowledge which has already been acquired, and hands it on to the scientist who, thus provided, proceeds to experiment. And thus to the increase of knowledge without the torch of learning, the scientist is reduced to groping in the dark. And without the scientist to use and test the results of his learning, the scholar sinks into a barren pedantry. Thus scholarship and science, in the widest sense of these terms, are the warp and woof of civilization. And the scientist, no less than the scholar, is dependent upon the written word. Not only must he be able to use the learning of the scholar, but he must be able to record the results of his own investigations. Therefore, we get a string of logic. Civilization depends upon scholarship and science, and these depend upon writing. Then a civilization can only arise when the art of writing is known. 10 below, we will prove that Africa is the true cradle of writing. A distinctive feature of civilized people is that they live in cities. But before people could build cities, they had to master the skill of using tools made of heavy metal. For a long time, people used tools made of wood and stone. Thus, the melting of iron created the basis for the emergence of civilization. 11. The data available today indicate that Central Africa was the site of the beginning of the Iron Age. So Professor Alexander Chamberlain, 1865–1914, who received the first doctorate in the world in the field of anthropology in the United States, notes that the melting of iron was first discovered by African blacks, and then from Egypt and Asia Minor. This art penetrated into Europe and other parts of the world. 12. Professor Franz Boas, 1858–1942, an American anthropologist, was firmly convinced of the primacy of Africa in the production of iron items. He argued that neither ancient Europe, nor ancient Western Asia, nor ancient China knew iron. Everything indicates that it came from Africa. Facts of trade by blacksmiths are found throughout Africa, from north to south, from east to west. Thanks to their simple bellows and the fire of charcoal, they smelted pure metal from iron ore, found in many parts of the continent, and forged extremely useful and beautiful items. 13. In the Journal of the Royal Institute of Anthropology, Volume 43, the Hungarian anthropologist Emil Tordé, 1875–1931, points to an iron tool found wedged in the masonry of the Great Egyptian Pyramid. Similarly, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, 485–425 BC, claims that iron tools were used by the ancient Egyptians in the construction of the Great Pyramid. Thus, we have proved that, according to the key elements of civilization, Africa is the site of the first civilization. Now let's get acquainted with this greatest civilization that developed in Africa even before the advent of the Egyptian kingdom. Although a number of scientists believed the ancient civilizations were either Egypt, or West Asia and India, the conclusion to which the world of science came is that both the Egyptian and Asian civilizations evolved from a more ancient common civilization. This is indicated by the similarities that are inherent in both regions. The archaeologist and Orientalist Wallace Budge, 1857–1934, developed this idea in such a way that it would be incorrect to state what the Egyptians borrowed from the Sumerians, or that the Sumerians borrowed from the Egyptians, but rather one can be sure that both peoples borrowed their theological systems from one common, but much more ancient source. Similarities of their religious systems are too identical to be just a coincidence. 14. American archaeologist and Egyptologist James Henry Breasted (1865–1935), for his part, points out to similarities between Babylon and Egypt in using the number 360 based on the number of days in the ancient form of the calendar of both regions, which is extremely important in dividing the circle, and consequently in geography, astronomy and time measurement. Although this approach has also been implemented earlier in Egypt, there is an obvious common source more ancient than these two civilizations. 15. British scientist George Sewell notes the existence of a great civilization, the scientific elements of which have already been subsequently used by ancient civilizations, which have preserved written records. 16. And he was very interested to know what kind of civilization it was. A number of scientists, finally, were able to discover that the first civilization in the world was created by a people known as Ethiopians. A prosperous civilization developed in the region, called in the Bible by the country of Hushkush, and marked on today's maps as Sudan. Ancient Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily, 90–30 BC, wrote that the Cushites were of the opinion that their country had not only been the birthplace of the human race and the cradle of the first civilization in the world, but also the location of Eden where, according to the Bible, all life on the earth began. 20. According to the Bible and its interpretations, the peoples of Northeast Africa, Ethiopians, Meroites, Cushites, Gitilas, and some peoples of the Middle East, the Sabaeans, the Hadramaut tribes, originated from Cush, Ham's son, and his descendants. The famous Jewish historian Josephus Flavius 37–100 AD lists the peoples of Cush, son of Ham and grandson of Noah, as those few tribes that retained their names in unchanged form. Of the four sons of Kam, the name Cush was not affected by the disastrous influence of time, because the Ethiopians whom he ruled did not only call themselves Hussein's Cushites at the time of Flavius, but also received this name from all the inhabitants of Asia. 202. British journalist and writer Lady Lugard (1852–1929) describes that in ancient history the glory of the Ethiopians was ubiquitous. Herodotus describes them as the tallest, most beautiful and the oldest of all human races. Before him, the ancient Greek poet Homer, 8th century BC, described them as the most pious of people, pets of the gods. The annals of all the great ancient countries of Asia Minor are full of descriptions of the Ethiopians. The records of Moses often mention them. But although they are described as the most powerful, most pious, and most beautiful of human races, it has always been noted that they were black. And there is no doubt that at that time the leading race of the Western world was a black race. 17. The Ethiopians, who came from Upper Nubia and the Meroe Islands, were Negroes who inhabited vast areas from South Abyssinia to the equator. The translators of the Ethiopian version of the Bible, 5th century, identified the country of Cush with Abyssinia, calling it Ethiopia. And so far in the language of Abyssinia, verse 31 in the 68th Psalm sounds like this: Ethiopia will stretch its hands to God. According to Homer and Herodotus, the inhabitants of these areas were in Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, Western Asia, India. 18. The name Ethiopians was coined by the ancient Greeks. When the Greeks began to contact the black inhabitants of Africa and Asia, they nicknamed them burnt faces, which translates into Greek as Ethiopians. Professor Thomas Henry Huxley, 1825–1895, refers to the black Ethiopians as the creators of civilization. And the civilizations of Egypt and the Euphrates-Tigris Valley developed from the already widespread Neolithic culture, which the scientist Grafton Elliott Smith, 1871–1937, calls Heliolite sunstone. It include practices such as 1. Circumcision, 2. The strange custom of sending a father to bed when a child is born, known as kuvada, 3. Massage practice, 4. Mummies, 5. Megaliths, boulders, e.g. Stonehenge, 6. The artificial deformation of young people's heads with the help of bandages, 7. Tattoos, 8. Religious association of the sun and snakes. 9. The use of symbols, known as the swastika, for good luck. 19. The most important cultural elements of the archaic civilization that the Ethiopians had founded, according to Professor John Jackson, 1907–1993. 1. Practice of agriculture involving irrigation. 2. The carving of stone images, the use of stone for the construction of pyramids, dolmens, graves carved into the rock, stone circles. 3. Metalworking. 4. Pottery. 5. Practice of making mummies. 6. Worship of the Great Mother Goddess. 7. Worship of heavenly bodies, such as stars, planets, the moon and the sun. 8. The ruling class was divided into two categories, associated with the celestial world, claiming the connection of power with the gods and practicing incestuous unions, b. associated with the underworld. 9. Totemism, a religious and social system based on the cult of the so-called totem. 10. Dual organization, both in the social and political spheres. 11. The predominance of the maternal right, according to which the throne was passed on the maternal line. 12. Presence of God's vicarious rulers. 2. Thus, the reader could see that Ethiopia is a civilization that preceded all others and gave rise to those civilizations that followed it. As Professor Arnold Tieren, 1760–1842, a German historian, tells us, the remains of temples and pyramids are found on the site of the city of Meroe, which was the center of Ethiopian civilization. From this, archaeologists were able to conclude that Meroe was the birthplace of pyramid architecture, and only then this architecture was perfected in Egypt. The carving on the monuments in Meroe shows that people who already mastered the sphere of art, abounded with the blessings of civilization and had a certain knowledge of science. It was here that hieroglyphics writing was first invented. 21. This is the obligatory attribute of civilization, the necessity of which was considered above. Next, we will consider in more detail the basis of civilization that Egypt inherited from Ethiopia. For now, pay attention to a rather interesting fact. Many scholars are inclined to believe that the Ethiopians were residents of the glorified Atlantis. The Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily pointed directly to western Ethiopia as the land inhabited by the Atlanteans. German scientist Eugene Georg, a leading researcher of the Atlantis issue, was inclined to believe that the Atlanteans were Ethiopians. In accordance with his words, the new century that followed the disappearance of Atlantis was marked by the world domination of the Ethiopian representatives of the black race. 22. In his turn, professor, archaeologist and ethnologist Leo Frobenius (1873–1938) pointed to the existence of an ancient Atlantean culture. But he did not think that in reality there was an island in the Atlantic Ocean, known as Atlantis. He pointed to its location on the west coast of Africa. The basis for it was that he unearthed the ruins of palaces and the most amazing sculptures in the land of Yoruba, the territory between the Niger River and the Atlantic Ocean. He was also able to learn from the legends of the Yoruba tribe about an ancient royal city and its castle of golden walls, which had drowned in the waters long ago. And in conclusion, he argued that the Yoruba had a connection with the ancient civilization of Maya. 23. The topic of discovery of America by Africans will be described separately below. The same connection between the Ethiopians and Atlantis is also noted by the Atlantologist Egerton Sykes (1894–1983), noting that before the destruction of the Atlantic continent, the civilization of West and Central Africa was a spectacular sight. 24. Captain Alexander Breggin cites at least one medieval map, which refers to the South Atlantic Ocean as the Ethiopian Ocean. 25. It is amazing how phenomenally developed was the civilization in ancient Africa, regardless of whether Atlantis really existed or not. It is important that the ancient peoples of Africa had such aspects of culture that many scientists dare to identify them with the notion of the ideal Atlanteans. Ancient Egypt, the civilization of black Africans. Egypt was the star of the ancient world. It shone to the whole world so much that it attracted attention from everywhere. The greatness of ancient Egypt will be considered below, but now I want to dwell on the matter of principle in our study of Egypt, namely, who were the ancient Egyptians? Because of its attractiveness as a subject of civilization, some later civilizations wanted to attribute to themselves the origins and reasons for such development of ancient Egypt. Egypt was considered to be both an offspring of the white Europeans, and an Asian offspring. In this issue, we want to base our judgment on the actual evidence and consequently consider the Egyptian people to be what it really was. Professor John Henry Clark, 1915–1998, Soundlay refers to the ancient Egyptians as an African people, noting the black and brown color of their skin. He also points out that people with light skin color began to move into the region much later. Admiring the civilization created by dark-skinned people. 20 Egyptologist Jeffrey Parsons refers to the Egyptian culture as genuinely African in its origin and development. 28. For example, Egypt had a matriarchal system that was alien to Greeks, but it was a common practice in African communities. In particular, the historian Herodotus noted that Egyptian women engaged in professional work and trade, while their husbands stayed at home and weaved. Daughters, not sons, were supposed to provide the parents with food and housing when they were old. Historian Diodorus of Sicily described the matriarchal system of Egypt both among ordinary people and in the royal families. According to the marriage contract, the husband belonged to his wife, and the couple agreed that the man should obey the woman in everything. The royal power in Egypt was inherited in the maternal line. 2. But the Egyptians were not just an African people. As the scientists tell us, from the beginning of the First Kamite dynasty and through the greater part of its dynastic period, African people with dark complexions, full lips, broad noses, and tightly curled hair were fully and overwhelmingly dominant in both the general population and the royal families. 29. The hieroglyphic representations to be found on the temples and monuments of Egypt prove the advanced status of the Negro race. As a result of his studies, scientist Martin Delany (1812–1885) noted the fact that the earliest settlers, builders of the pyramids, sculptors of the sphinxes, and original god-kings, pharaohs, were blacks of the Negro race. 30. In accordance with the most ancient historical documents on Egypt, the works of the historian Manafon, Palermo Stone, Sacker list the royal papyrus of Torino. The formation of a single Egyptian state occurred about the second half of the 4th millennium BC. The forces of the Black Land of Upper Egypt, probably during the reign of Narmer, the historical king often equated with the legendary Menes, had completed the task of coupling Upper Egypt in the south with Lower Egypt in the north, essentially the Delta, into a single unified state. Upper Egypt was located in the south and was inhabited exclusively by black Africans. Lower Egypt was located in the north in the delta of the Nile River. 31. According to inscriptions in the Egyptian temple of Horus at Edfu, the civilization was brought to Egypt from the south by a detachment of invaders led by King Horus. 2. This indicates the prevailing and determining position of the civilization created by black Africans in the south and their exceptional role in the creation of ancient Egypt. Although the history of the struggle for the unification of the two lands is lacking in many details, it is highly significant that Narmer, the first lord of the two lands of Egypt, came from the black-skinned south. Egyptologist Michael Rice emphasizes the dominance of Upper Egypt, stressing the fact that it was from the south that the most enduring influences in Egyptian society came, and without doubt most of its greatest leaders were Southerners too. Throughout her long history, Egypt constantly needed to return to the south to refresh herself and to restore her institutions, even perhaps her soul, when the weight of years or of external pressures laid too heavily upon her. Michael Rice further noted that the culture which grew and flourished in the Nile Valley was wholly autochthonous. Black Africans, it must certainly be acknowledged, were the true ancestors of the pharaohs, in all their majesty and power. Egypt's decline began when these essentially African characteristics became diluted by incursions from outside. 32. In a similar way, the preeminent British Egyptologist of the late 19th and early 20th century, William Matthew Flinders Petrie (1853–1942), noted, "It is remarkable how renewed vitality has always come into Egypt from the south. Each of the great stages of Egyptian history seems to owe its new energy to a southern conquest. 34 Even the Egyptian term for the royal power means the man who came from the south, or southerner. 35 Historian Chancellor Williams points to the Black South of Africa as the real source of Egypt's wealth as well as that of Egypt's civilization. The gold mines were there, as were the vast stones quarries, copper and tin mines. Here were most of the papyrus plants from which the blacks invented paper and built the first and finest boats. Here in the south was all the ivory and the only source of the then prized ostrich feathers. In short, Egyptian foreign trade depended almost entirely on southern Ethiopia. 39 Examining the development of civilization in Africa, it is very important to understand the order that was present in the history of this region. For example, formation of the early kingdom of the Tasseti, which was located in the lower Nubia, preceded the creation of a unified Egyptian kingdom. And most likely there was the residence of the first Egyptian dynasty. 36 Thanks to recent studies, it became known that only pharaohs were buried in the great tombs of Tasseti. 37 It should also be pointed out that while Narmer is generally regarded by modern historians as Egypt's first true monarch, he likely saw himself as the culmination of an historical epic rather than the beginning. Narmer was the heir to thousands of years of African achievement, and assumed charge of an already advanced and well-evolved society. 38 Historian Diodorus of Sicily confirms that the ancient Egyptians took from the Black Ethiopians their hieratic writing, sculpture and a number of other secrets, laws and veneration of rulers as gods. And the Ethiopians themselves initially viewed Egypt as their colony. The ancient Greek philosopher Theophrastus 370–287 BC notes that the knowledge of the Ethiopians exceeded the knowledge of India and Egypt. Also, the Greek records indicate that Pythagoras learned from the Egyptian priests only what they had learned from the Ethiopians. 25 As noted above, Egypt was characterized by a matriarchal system that was characteristic of the Ethiopian civilization. Interestingly, the Egyptians did not call themselves Egyptians. This term was invented by the Greeks, and its Latin form sounds like Egypt. The Egyptians themselves called their country Ham, which literally means black country. And the ancient inhabitants of Egypt called themselves Kemet, which means black people. 42 According to the Bible, Egypt was inhabited by the descendants of Ham, the son of Noah. Mizraim, the son of Ham, is associated with Egypt. Even today, for people in the Middle East, the word Mizraim means Egypt. And Mizraim's brother was Cush, whose name, as noted above, is associated with Ethiopia. A historian, Egyptologist and anthropologist Sheikh Anta Diop (1923–1986) claims that the inhabitants of ancient Egypt were Negroes. This scientist, who received a master's and doctoral degrees from the University of Paris, in particular, refers to Herodotus, who repeatedly insisted on the Negro nature of the Egyptians and described them as blacks. And the French Egyptologist Gaston Maspero (1846–1916) summarized the opinions of all ancient writers concerning the Egyptians that the Egyptians belonged to the African race. 43 Therefore, we have assured ourselves in regard to the following aspects of the ancient Egypt. 1. It was founded by black Africans. 2. Its civilization was based on achievements previously made by black Africans. 3. Black Africans held high positions of power in Egypt. 4. Black Africans from South Africa brought Egypt to new stages of its development. 5. Finally, ancient Egyptians themselves were an African people and had dark skin. Egypt, the greatest civilization of the ancient world. Now that we have found out who the ancient Egyptians were, we can see the achievements of Egypt in a new and true light. namely, as achievements of black Africans. This is the matter of principle that we had to make clear above. Now let us enjoy an excursion of the majestic Egypt. In the pre-dynastic period, the Egyptians already imported gold, silver, copper, tin, lead, iron, red iron ore, corundum, galena, turquoise, volcanic glass, serpentine, lapis lazuli, coral and tortoise shell. From these materials they produced beautiful and useful works of art, which was destined to inspire surprise and admiration in the following centuries. Point 2. The first golden age of Egypt is the historical period known as the Ancient Kingdom 2686–181 BC. It is this era that is glorified as a milestone in the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. These structures, in particular the three of them located mainly on the Giza Plateau, appear to be the most enduring architectural structures in the world. These objects of architectural craftsmanship remain a source of reverence, surprise and inspiration. As the Arab proverb goes, the whole world fears time, but time fears the pyramids. Point 45. The French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte (1769–1821) calculated that there was enough stone in the Giza pyramids to build a wall, measuring 10 feet in height and 1 foot in width, surrounding the entire country of France. The mathematician Monge, who was among the savants accompanying Napoleon on this campaign, is alleged to have confirmed this calculation. Point 46. The occupation of Egypt by Ethiopia served as the beginning of the First Egyptian Golden Age. According to the British archaeologist Flinders Petrie (1853–1942), one of the founders of modern systematic Egyptology, the conqueror of Sudanese appearance founded the Third Dynasty, as a result of which many completely new ideas penetrated the country. This new movement reached its culmination in the days of Pharaoh Cheops, who laid the foundation for Egyptian development. Point 48. By itself, the Pyramid of Cheops, the most perfect geometric form in architecture and the only survivor from among the 7 wonders of the world, is the largest single building ever built by man. Until 1300, it was the highest building in the world. Architectural works performed by the Egyptians required mechanical and technical knowledge that even modern professionals are still trying to explain. Point 35. Herodotus describes that the pyramid was built for 20 years, and that it had inscriptions that showed how many radishes, onions and garlic the builders had eaten. The amount spent on these products was 1,600 talents of silver, that is, 40,000 kilograms of silver. In this case, Herodotus was amazed how much more was required to purchase iron tools, food and clothing for workers, taking into account the duration of the construction process. Point 49. The French astronomer Thomas Moreau, director of the observatory in Bourges, in his book, The Mysterious Science of the Pharaohs, insists that the Great Pyramid was used as a repository for storing scientific instruments, weight and length standards, and not as a grave. In place of the sarcophagus there is a granite slab, which served as a standard of length. The length of this plate is 1/10,000,000th part of the distance from any pole to the center of the earth. This constant value, which was only recently determined by modern scientists, is the basis of the metric system. Thanks to this figure, the Egyptians were able to calculate the most accurate circumference of our planet. The height of the Great Pyramid is 1/1000,000th of the distance from the Earth to the Sun. This distance could not be established by scientists with the utmost precision until 1874. Corridors of the pyramid point precisely in the direction of the polar star of that time, Tuban, the ventilation corridors of the south side, to the star Sirius, and from the north side to the star El-Natak. The Grand Gallery, one of the components of the pyramid, could be used as an equatorial telescope of a modern astronomical observatory. Point 50. The Egyptians probably knew about the golden section and the pi number, because these were reflected in the proportions of the pyramid. When studying the pyramid, a number of very precise proportions were found, such as the exact duration of the year, the constant precession, etc. As a result, Professor Charles Smith Piezzi (1819–1900) and Dr. Alfred Russel Wallace (1823–1913) noted that such precision in the construction of the Great Pyramid would require the best modern measuring instruments. 5. As the southern and northern sides of the pyramid were made with concavities, the shadow of the sun disappears during the equinox. This explanation was made by Professor André Pochain, born in 1891, while the Roman poet Decimus Ausonius (310–394 AD) wrote, "The pyramid itself swallows the shadow at noon." 25. It is noted that slaves were not used for construction, but it was rather a perfectly organized construction process. 100,000 workers were employed for 3 months for the transportation of stones. This work took place when there was a rise in river water levels, and there was nothing else to do for the people. The transportation and preparation of the place took 10 years to complete. The actual construction took another 20 years to complete. 53. The Egyptians were both a prosperous and highly moral people. The existing images on the monuments describe all aspects of the life of the Egyptians, but there are no violent or debauched scenes there. The punishment for killing a slave was death penalty. There was no other similar law in the times of slavery, either in ancient or in modern times. This indicates the value which the Egyptians attached to human life. Another sign of civilization was that soldiers did not carry weapons except for the period of service. Ordinary citizens did not carry weapons at all. Women were treated with a great respect. During the feast, guests were met by the host and hostess, who are sitting side by side in a large armchair. Their figures show mutual love between them. Their gentle manners, gestures of caress and kindness to children created a warm and touching picture of family life. Civil law functioned in such a way that the poor were protected by law on an equal basis with the rich. The judges received large salaries, thereby removing the temptation to take bribes. They treated with honor the symbol of truth, which they used to wear around their necks on a gold chain. 2. From the Old Kingdom emerged such luminaries as 1. Nebuchadnezzar, years of rule 2635–2611 BC, the first recognized royal personage to commission the construction of a large monument in hewn stone. 2. Bedjmez, the noted African ship. 3. Nemet Sneferu, the benevolent king during whose reign the classic pyramid form appeared. 4. Khafra, years of rule 2558–2532 BC, who built the second Giza pyramid, great as Khafra, and may have had the face of Hor-Amakhet, the great sphinx, rendered in his own likeness. 5. Menkaura, years of rule 2520–2480 BC, builder of the third Giza pyramid, divine as Menkaura. 6. Hesire, chief of dentists and physicians. 7. Sahor, who launched the first recorded Kemetic expedition to Punt, God's land, in eastern Africa. 8. Ptahhotep, author of profound precepts of morality and ethics set forth in the first preserved philosophical works. 9. Unas, whose tomb chamber was the first to be inscribed with the religious literature now known as the Pyramid Texts. 10. Pepi II, another southerner, whose 94 years on the throne is the longest documented reign in human annals. 38. We would like to single out Imhotep, who is considered the first known architect in the world history and a scientist. He designed the first step pyramid, was an astronomer, architect, prime minister of King Djoser, the chief doctor of the monarch. The authority of Imhotep in subsequent periods of Egyptian history was so great that he was considered the greatest sage of all time, has a magical power. 56. Imhotep is also credited with the foundation of Egyptian medicine. In particular, he is considered the author of the Edwin Smith's Papyrus, a fundamental medical research. This papyrus was the first to determine the real causes of many diseases. A famous Canadian medical practitioner of the 19th century, William Osler, called Imhotep the father of medicine and the first medical practitioner whose personality comes from the fog of antiquity. Imhotep is the initiator of the movement of protesting scientists, as evidenced by his words, "The scientist does not need to be instructed on how to cook green spurge. Earlier sources of this saying, or its counterparts, have not yet been found by archaeologists. His other saying is, eat, drink, have fun, for tomorrow we will die. The era of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, 2040 to 1783 BC, was also founded by noble descendants from southern Egypt. This period was also marked by grand engineering and architectural achievements. Characterizing the work of this time, the founder of Egyptology Jean-François Champollion (1790–1832) said the Egyptians built as if they were 100 feet (30.5 meters) high. Pharaoh Amenemhet III, years of rule, ca. 1853–1806 BC, raised two major pyramids, at Dashur and Hawara. The one at Hawara possessed a sepulchral chamber of yellow quartzite 22 feet long, 8 feet wide and 6 feet high. The total weight of the chamber was 110 tons. The roof of the chamber itself was composed of 3 massive pieces of yellow quartzite with a combined weight of 45 tons. Around Lake Karun, a vast embankment was constructed which, according to Egyptologist James H. Breasted, was 43.5 kilometers long and secured over 11,000 hectares of fertile land for cultivation. The lake was turned into an artificial body of water joined to the Nile with a canal. A great dam was built which regulated the mighty river's flow, and this minimized the risks of a poor harvest. Nearby there were two 12-meter-high statues of the king. Fragments of these statues can still be seen in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, England. In its turn, a magnificent polished pink granite sphinx of Amenemhet II, African king of Egypt, is the most spectacular attraction of the Egyptian collection in the Louvre Paris 57 in St. Petersburg, Russia. There are ancient Egyptian sphinxes of the pharaoh Amenhotep III today on display on the university embankment. To the south of the Karun Lake stood the so-called labyrinth. According to Herodotus, it may have been the largest single building in the ancient times. Herodotus wrote that the labyrinth surpassed the pyramids, and let me quote him, "I have seen this building, and it is beyond my power to describe. It must have cost more in labor and money than all the walls and public works of the Greeks put together." 49. The facing of the building was composed of quartz and alabaster, giving it the appearance of white marble. This huge complex, with 12 individual courts, was dedicated to Sebek, the crocodile-headed deity sacred in the Fayum oasis. The labyrinth contained 3,000 rooms, 1,500 below the ground and 1,500 above. The building itself measured 800 by 1,000 feet. Archaeologist F. Petrie, who conducted excavations of this site, said, "The mere figures will not signify readily to the mind the vast extent of construction. But when we compared with the greatest of the other Egyptian temples, it could be somewhat realized. On that space could be erected the Great Hall of Karnak, and all the successive temples adjoining it, and the great court and pylons of it, and also the Temple of Mut, and also the 2 great temples of Luxor, and still there would be room for the whole of the Ramesseum. In short, all the temples of the east bank of Thebes, and one of the largest on the west bank, might be placed together in the one area." 59. The great inventions made by Egyptians include alphabet, paper, ink and pen. They are credited with the invention of the art of shaving, wigs, hats and pillows. They made the first paper from thin cane strips of papyrus connected together. The ink was made from a mixture of vegetable glue, soot and water. Writing was invented, and its influence on the development of civilization is invaluable. According to the historian G. Breasted, the invention of writing and convenient writing on paper had a greater impact on the development of the human race than any other intellectual invention in the history of mankind. This was more important than all the wars and all invented devices. 60. The next great invention of the Egyptians was the calendar. The early Egyptians counted the time by the moon, but the lunar calendar was not accurate. Subsequently, they found this inaccuracy, and invented an improved calendar consisting of 365 days a year. Local astronomers even calculated that the true length of the year was 365 1/4 days, but they did not include this adjustment. 2. In addition, it was the ancient Egyptians who invented the star signs, representing a fairly accurate structure of celestial bodies in the sky. And this knowledge was preceded similar knowledge found in other subsequent civilizations. 62. Herodotus noted that the Egyptians who lived in the cultivated parts of the country, by their practice of keeping records of the past, had made themselves the most learned of any nation of which he had had experience. 49. At the time of its heyday, Egypt dominated over the whole of Africa and Eurasia. 64. In this chapter, we have seen that humanity began its development from Africa. Africans also created the first civilization, called the Ethiopian civilization, and the greatest civilization of the ancient times in Egypt. They invented writing, iron melting and other key attributes of civilization. Further on, we will see in what other parts of the world African civilization has spread its influence. 1. The first people lived in Africa, and all other nations originated from them. 2. Inventions made by Africans in the Stone Age laid the basis for all further mechanisms. 3. Civilization is nothing but being taught a culture. 4. Africa is the cradle of writing. 5. Iron founding was first discovered by Africans. 6. The first civilization in the world was created by Ethiopians. 7. Ethiopians are identified as Atlantes. 8. Ancient Egyptians were an African people. 9. Negroids dominated in terms of quality and quantity in both the population and the royal families of Egypt. 10. The only survivor of the 7 wonders of the world is African pyramid of Cheops. 11. Imhotep, an African, was the first doctor whose name stands out of the darkness of the past. 12. The great inventions made by Egyptians include alphabet, paper, ink and pen. 13. Egyptians were the most educated of all the people known to Herodotus. 14. The first calendar was invented in Africa, and they developed astronomy. 1. Name the place from where mankind originated and extended all over the planet. 1. Asia. 2. 2. Europe. 1. 3. Africa. 3. 1. Who were ancient Egyptians? 1. Africans. 3. 2. A mixture of white European and Asian people. 2. 3. White people. 1. 1. What essential elements of civilization appeared in Africa? 1. Iron founding. 2. 2. Writing and system of education. 1. 3. All of the above. 3. 4. None of the above. 0. Self-assessment test results. Less than 7 points. Unfortunately, you have a point of view regarding the origin of civilization that is characteristic of the racism theory. You have had a very strong influence from books that glorified Europeans exclusively for creating their civilization. You need to carefully study this book and, if necessary, refer to the list of used literature to study deeper the facts we have mentioned. 7 to 10 points. Not bad. You have a moderately categorical view of the role of non-European peoples in the origin of civilization. Nevertheless, you have not fully realized the key role of Africans in this process. This book will be a real discovery for you. 11 to 12 points. Excellent. You have a fairly sound and proper understanding of how civilization originated. The following chapters will allow you to see the unique role of Africans, not only in the creation, but also in the subsequent development of civilization at different stages of history. Practical assignments. 1. Compare the information on origins of civilization given in local textbooks with the facts written in this chapter. 2. What is the importance of recognizing the people who do something for the first time in history? 3. Give examples of scientific areas or fields of life where innovations caused subsequent development of an entire global direction of activities. 4. Evaluate the importance of discoveries made by Africans which have been described above for the subsequent development of civilization. Chapter 2. Africans are creators of main Asian civilizations. Before we start describing how civilization came from Africa to Europe, let's see how it came to Asia. After all, the Asian region of that time in particular was far more competitive in the context of development than Europe. African roots of the Mongoloid race. Professor J. Jackson connected the most ancient civilizations of Africa, the territory of present-day Libya, Egypt, Sudan, and Khartoum, Western Asia, present-day Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, India, and Russia. Europe, Greece, Italy, Crete, with a nation known in history as Ethiopians, or Cushites. We've already examined this subject a little in the first chapter of this book. Namely, Ethiopian social and political structures became the basis for myths and stories of the majority of ancient world civilizations: ancient Egypt, Sumerians, Colchis west of Transcaucasus, Crete, India, and so on. Wherever megalithic architecture and gigantic ruins of ancient cities could be found, at all times big statues and other artifacts of people with Negroid appearance were found there. 65. As anthropologist Sheikh Anta Diop states, a man born in Africa has to be dark-skinned due to a considerable strength of ultraviolet emission in the equatorial belt. When moving to more tolerant areas, people were gradually losing pigmentation as a result of selection and adaptation. After leaving the Great Lakes region of Africa, Africans used different routes of different complexity. These routes included the Nile Valley area, the Isthmus of Suez, Palestine, and from there they stretched out to Far East Asia, Oceania, and Europe. Another migration path led from Somalia, the Horn of Africa, to the east along the shores of southern Asia. 66. Settlement of people from Africa and change of their skin color were also clarified in the first chapter. Thus, we have an idea where people came from to different parts of the world, Asia in particular. From Africa. We also examined the reasons of different skin pigmentation of people in different parts of the world. The so-called Mongoloid race was defined as yellow-skinned, according to classification of the French anthropologist P. Pinard. As a working hypothesis, C.A. Diop supposed that a so-called yellow-skinned race is probably a result of extensive blending of white and black people at a very early stage of human history. He states that the content of melanin in yellow-skinned people and also such physical characteristics as prognathism, anticipates protruding jaws when lower jaw has no mental protuberance, lips and nose correspond to those that can be seen in mixed alliances. Naturally, over the centuries these differences underwent even more change, taking into consideration also 1,000 years of forced adaptations to factors of environment, mainly wind currents. 43. This concerns the race as such. Now let us look at the role of Africans in development of different Asian civilizations. Africans are an original example of military mastership of Japan. Traces of black people were definitely found both in the prehistoric period and the following eras all over Northeast Asia. 68. Thus, Reverend James Body, alumnus of Lincoln and Princeton universities, noted a considerable and indelible African procession in the early history of Japan, and that Japanese, at least in part, are Asian Negroes. They are described as having special features, coarse hair, and dark skin color. Apart from their striking Negro features, ancient Japanese historians themselves wrote that during prehistoric era black barbarians of the South sailed from the South on ships and settled in Japan. These immigrants mixed and united with one another and with local residents. And as a result the Japanese became a homogeneous race whose physical features show an undeniable presence of a Negroid element. 69. Black people in Japan have played a prominent role since ancient times up until the 8th century AD. 43. Thus a Japanese proverb says that for a samurai to have courage he has to have at least a little black blood in him. 71. Black Sakano no Tamuramaru was a prominent figure in ancient Japan. In Japanese history, he is characterized as an example of martial valor. He attracted the attention of some of the most prominent scientists of the 20th century America. Anthropologist Alexander Chamberlain noted, Negroes' contribution to the human civilization is infinite and unforgettable. Thus, crossing Asia, we again find traces of Negroes, for example, in distant Japan. When the Japanese progressed to the north, the leader of their armies was Sakano no Tamamaro, a famous general and a Negro. 12. At that time, Neolithic residents in those areas were Ainu, whose name, by the way, is also conformable with the name Anu, a name used for ancient Africans in the Nile Valley. As a result of successful leadership of the Japanese armies, the black Sakano no Tamamaro became the first man who was honored with the title Seitei-Zyogun. In Japanese history, this name was given rulers of Japan, the first statesman of Japan. He occupied the position of Dainagon, senior emperor's advisor, and founded a famous Kiyomizu-dera temple in Kyoto. In the following centuries he was honored among the military as an exemplary commander, and became the first one to receive the highest military rank in Japan, Zyogun. 73, 74, 75. It is incredible that Japanese still admire their ancient black general. Now let's look at the following Asian regions. Black people formed the first states of China and Southeast Asia. A research the results of which were published in Los Angeles Times in September 1998 shows that a big part of present-day Chinese population, 1/5 of the currently living, has genetic African roots. 76. Archaeology professor of Harvard University, the Chinese archaeologist Huang Qichong writes that presence of Africans in China has been discovered throughout all ancient China. 77. A relatively recent work of historian James Branson, 1985, shows that black people took active part in the historic period of China. The ancient Shang dynasty of China, 1600 to 1027 BC, apparently had black roots. Thus, the Zhou dynasty 1045 to 221 BC, that overthrew the Shang dynasty, described the Shang as having black and oily skin. 78. First states of Southeast Asia appeared by the end of the 3rd century. This region originally attracted attention as a rich source of coral forest and mineral products, all of which were extremely valuable. The first state of Southeast Asia was Funan, that was situated in present-day southern Kampuchea, Cambodia, and Vietnam. The biggest part of knowledge about ancient history of this region is based on Chinese and Indian sources. So, Chinese historical documents, when talking about Funan citizens, the founders of the first state of Southeast Asia, described them as ugly and black with curly hair. Khmer people, representatives of the same group of people, are described by Chinese as small and black. 79. Harvard University anthropologist Roland Dixon, 1875 to 1934, noted that the ancient Khmers had the following physical features: very short stature, dark skin, curly or even frizzy hair, wide noses, and wide negroid lips. 80. Therefore we can see the role of Africans in formation of the first civilizations in China and Southeast Asia. And now let's move to the greatest of all ancient Asian civilizations. Sumer is the greatest Asian civilization created by Africans. Some scientists said the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia was the oldest. But the oldest documented date found in Africa was 4236 BC. As at that time the calendar was already in use in ancient Egypt. At the same time, the most conservative Sumerologists date the start of the first dynastic period of Sumer not earlier than 2750 BC. 43. Similar to Egypt, Sumerian civilization and neighboring civilization of Elam are branches of the center of civilization situated in Ethiopia. Extraordinary resiliency and unprecedented scale of Ethiopian civilization gave start not only to Egyptian, but also to the Sumerian civilization. 82. Ancient Sumer, in the Bible known as Shinar, was the center of civilization in the early East Asia. Thriving in the 3rd millennium BC, Sumer set a tone and gave direction to subsequent kingdoms and empires. Often connected to Chaldea and Babylon, it covered the valleys of Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a distance of 300 miles from the Persian Gulf to Akkad. While Sumer's cultural achievements are appreciated, an important question of its ethnic composition is often left aside. Naturally, it would be silly to state that Sumerians were homogeneous in their composition, or belonged to a certain racial type. But it is quite evident that bright light of the Sumerian civilization can be connected only to arrival of black immigrants from the Nile Valley in Africa. Concerning the connection of the Nile Valley and Sumer, anthropologist Sheikh Anta Diop lists the following arguments. 1. The Bible supports the idea that Sumerians were black migrants from the Nile Valley. Thus Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 and 10 says Cush. According to researchers of the Bible, Cushites were a nation in Ethiopia to the south from Egypt, was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh and Shinar, Sumer. 2. Epos on Gilgamesh, one of the greatest works of literature of ancient East, describes the god Enlil as a pastor of black people. 3. Identity of names of deities in Sumer and African mythologies. 4. According to Roman historian Diodorus of Sicily, Egyptians considered Chaldeans, Sumerians descendants, a colony of Egyptian priest astronomers. 5. There are similarities between ancient multi-level houses of worship of Mesopotamia and Iran, ziggurats, and step pyramids of Africa. 43. The very name, Sumerians, translates is black-headed. One of the prominent personalities of Sumer was Gudea, an Africanoid ruler of the city-state of Lagash. During his rule, the deity Anud, that had an identical counterpart in Africa, became a supreme deity of Sumer. Thanks to a number of inscriptions, it was possible to recreate information on how Gudea conducted conquests that led to conquering of Susa and most of Elam. Afterwards, residents of Susa and Elam came to Lagash to help him build a temple for his god. Gudea's god, as we already know, was Anud, whose name is found almost everywhere where black people are found. 86. It's quite interesting that despite a general lack of stone in Mesopotamia, Gudea had numerous personal statues made of black diorite rock. By this he wanted to point out to his descendants a resolution of a dilemma concerning his origin, leaving his trademarks, made of stone that clearly indicated his African roots. Enki was an important and interesting figure in the pantheon of Sumerian gods. It was considered that one of the lands that Enki most cared about was Melek country. It was a country of sailors that exported furniture, copper, gold plating, lapis lazuli, and carnelian mineral. Melek, known as the Black Land, and Sumer, literally the land of blackheads, 84, had close ties. During times following the Sumerian civilization, Melek was often mentioned as a place of black people. Its geographic location is determined by contemporary scientists to be either in Ethiopia, or in Harappa, territory of India and Pakistan. Both regions were settled by black people. 85. As a British Egyptologist Gerald Massey (1828–1907) notes, primitive Chaldeans, a later name of Sumerians and Babylonians, were known to Greeks also as Scythians. The name Scythians was a synonym to Ethiopians, who were descendants of Cepheus, the king of Ethiopia. 87. The ancient black Babylonians differed from the white depicted with long beards. They were defeated by Sargon of Akkad, ruled approximately 2316–2261 BC. These particular Sumerians were called blackheads. It is known that Chaldeans advanced very much in astronomy. They observed 4 satellites of Jupiter and 7 satellites of Saturn. 90. A local astronomer Nabri Manu determined duration of a year very accurately, being mistaken only by 26 minutes and 55 seconds. Another mathematician and astronomer Kidanu determined time of eclipses so accurately that contemporary scientists were able to reach the same level of accuracy only several decades ago. 2. In Mesopotamian city-state of Kish, Sumerians have built a castle that consisted of hundreds of rooms in size exceeded the French Versailles that was built thousands of years later. 85. As we can see, it took Europeans a long time to catch up with development of the civilization built by Africans. The English explorer of Africa Harry Johnston (1858–1927) describes Elamites, Sumerians' neighbors, as representatives of the Negroid race with frizzy hair. Frizzy hair, Africanized and thick lips convinced him that a Negroid element had been present in Babylon. 92+. Archaeological excavations convinced Professor Alfred Haddon that a proof existed of Babylonians having had Kushite Ethiopian blood. 93. Even the first archaeologists who found remains of Sumerians called them Kushites. The American professor William Perry, born 1927, also refers to myths, legends and traditions, language, and writing system that indicate that Sumerians have African origin. 94. The English Egyptologist Henry Hall (1873–1930) considered them Dravidians who had migrated from India. 95. Later we will assure ourselves also of Dravidians' African roots, having conducted research on ethnic pedigrees. In his work, The Origin of Nations, the English historian George Rawlinson (1812–1902) revealed that the author of the biblical book, Genesis, had depicted unity of Egyptians, Ethiopians, Southern Arabians, and primitive inhabitants of Babylon as members of the same ethnic family. 97. The city of Susa, the capital of the neighboring state of Elam in Iranian territory, in its turn was considered by ancient Greeks and Romans to be residence of the legendary king Memnon, a black warrior who was one of the most heroic figures of the Trojan War. At the same time, in Greek mythology, Memnon's father Tithonus is the founder of Susa. Memnon's story was one of the most circulated heroic sagas of the ancient world. He was mentioned in the works of Homer, Hesiod, Virgil, Ovid, Pindar, Diodorus of Sicily, Aeschylus, Pausanias, Strabo, and Apollonius of Tyana. Archnus of Miletus wrote an epic poem called Aethiopes, in which Memnon was the main hero. According to the legend, Memnon was killed by Achilles, surrounded by a coalition of Greeks, when he was defending the Trojans of King Priam. Memnon brought a big army of Ethiopians to defend Troy. Homer perpetuated him in the Odyssey, by describing him as godlike and the most beautiful of all. According to results of excavations in Susa conducted by the French archaeologist Marcel de Olafroy (1844–1920), a high possibility that the state of Elam had been ruled by a black dynasty was revealed, and based on their facial features it had been an Ethiopian dynasty. The French archaeologist Georges Cantenier describes Susa as, supposedly, a product of blending of Kushites and Negroes with relatively flat noses, wide nostrils, significant cheekbones and thick lips. 43. After Susa was ruined, the black people of Elam remained an important factor in the region. Thus Herodotus depicts them as foreign military armies used during Greco-Persian Wars. 49. At that time the territory of southern Baluchistan, eastern Iran, and western Pakistan were known as Gadrosia, country of the Black Nation. Persian King Cyrus built a winter capital in the restored Susa, and in this town lived the prophet Daniel. Even today this very place is considered to be the place of Daniel's burial. In the 19th century, George Rawlinson wrote, even today ancient Susa is known as Khuzestan, the country of Khuzes Kushites. 100. Thus the reader could make sure for themselves that Sumerian culture, that become a foundation for development of culture of many nations of the Middle East, had African roots. Phoenicia, a civilization of black people in the Mediterranean Sea. Phoenicians were a branch of Canaanites, who, according to the Bible, Genesis chapter 9, were descendants of the brother of Cush, Ethiopia, and Mizraim, Egypt, and belonged to the Hamitic ethnic family. Diop states that history of Phoenicia is unclear only if one ignores biblical data, according to which Phoenicians, in other words Canaanites, were initially Negroes that reached the development of their civilization and subsequently mixed with white nomadic tribes. Economic relations between Egypt and Phoenicia were at a very high level. Frequently military, diplomatic, religious, and commercial presence of Egypt existed in Canaan suburbs and in cities of Phoenicia. According to Diop, even in the most difficult times of failure Egypt could count on Phoenicia as its brother. Turning to Phoenician religious mythology, we will clearly see a reflection of Egyptian mythology. For example, we will see the importance of the deity Thoth, who in both cultures was the inventor of science and letters. This information can be found in passages of works of an ancient Phoenician author Sanhuniaton. And in works of Ras Shamra we find that the homeland of the national heroes of Phoenicia was the southern regions, on the border with Egypt. By the middle of the second millennium BC, Phoenicians had acquired powerful naval forces and were in the process of creating a network of colonies and trading centers. Having achieved the highest glory and prosperity, while white-skinned European race has remained uncivilized. 43. Around 1500 BC they succeeded in going out into the Atlantic Ocean from the Mediterranean Sea and reaching the Canary Islands. Around 600 BC, on the orders of the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, they went around the African continent. Their route from the Red Sea to the Strait of Gibraltar took 3 years. During this journey they began to use oars that were located on 3 decks, and a 4-sided sail covering an area of about 300 square meters. For sure, the most famous Phoenician colony was Carthage, New City. It was founded in 814 BC on the northern coast of Africa, on the territory of present-day Tunisia. According to the legend, Queen Dido founded Carthage, bringing the population out of Tyre, a famous Phoenician city, one of the oldest major trading centers, located on the territory of present-day Lebanon. By the start of the 3rd century BC, Carthage became the biggest state in the west of the Mediterranean Sea. The Carthaginians were a militaristic and businesslike nation. They dug 2 harbors on the coast, one for military ships which housed about 220 ships, the other, for trade ships. In addition, they built a fortified wall around the whole city. It was 37 kilometers long and in some places reached 12 meters in height. Carthage became unapproachable from land in the sea, where it was guarded by warships. Carthaginians sailed to different countries and conquered southern Spain, lands of North Africa, the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. Phoenicians created a strong civilization with developed crafts, maritime trade and rich culture. The Phoenician writing system became one of the first documented systems of phonetic writing. The Phoenicians made such contributions to the development of world civilization. 1. Invented alphabetic writing that served basis for Greek and Latin alphabets. 2. Were the first to go around Africa from east to west. 3. Contributed to the development of shores of the Mediterranean Sea and their inclusion into international trade. 4. Improved technology of glass production. 5. Learned to extract purple from shells of shellfish. As we have seen above, all these achievements are directly related to black people. Black people founded ancient civilizations of the Indus Valley. Exceptionally valuable records expressing close connections between India, ancient Egypt, and Ethiopia have existed for more than 2,000 years. In the 1st century BC, for example, Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily wrote, "From Ethiopia Osiris passed through Arabia, on the border with the Red Sea, and reached as far as India. He built many cities in India, one of which he called Nisa, as he wished to have a memory of the Egyptian city Nisa, where he had been brought up." 102. Earlier historians and geographers called all area from India to Egypt, including both countries, Ethiopia. And all dark-skinned and black people of this region were called Ethiopians. At the same time, they were divided into Eastern Ethiopians, Asians, and Western Ethiopians, Africans. 18. Professor Thomas Henry Huxley believed that one could trace Egyptians and Indian Dravidians to a belt that in ancient times spread from India to Spain and was inhabited by dark brown people. 19. Although nowadays people of every shade and color live in India, ancient inhabitants of India were black. Their descendants still live in central India. They have Negroid features, dark skin, thick and frizzy hair. Professor Lynn Thorndike (1882–1965), an American historian, describes ancient Indians as short black people with almost Negroid noses. 103. The American historian William James Durant (1885–1981) depicts these early Hindus as follows: dark-skinned, with broad noses, who we call Dravidians, not knowing the origin of this word. 104. The first great civilizations of India were founded by these Asian Ethiopians in the Indus Valley. They built large cities, the main of which were Mohenjo-daro, Chandhu-daro and Harappa. Virtually the first public toilets known to archaeologists as well as urban sewage system were found in Mohenjo-daro. Dishes and household utensils bore traces of standardization. In addition, numerous weights for scales and embossed stamps were found, indicating standardization and centralized control in trade sphere. Many buildings in the lower city, where apparently wealthy citizens lived, had spacious courtyards, and brick stairs presumably led either to the second floor of a house or to a flat roof adapted for residence. Walls were covered with plaster to prevent impact of moist air or temperature changes on the brick. They even invented the process of making stainless iron. There is still an iron column in Delhi, India, that bears not a single trace of rust. Archaeologist Walter Fairservice states that the Harappan civilization cultivated cotton and tamed chickens. 108. Apollonius of Tyana, who, according to some evidence, visited India around the 1st century AD, and Christian writer Eusebius of Caesarea, who is considered to be the father of church history, also pointed out presence of Ethiopians in India. 105,106 in the work The Journey of Alexander, which was written for Roman Emperor Constantius II. India was regarded as a continuation of Egypt and Ethiopia. 107. Among others, these are the evidences that people of the Harappan civilization were black. 1. Remains of skeletons, eyewitness accounts which are presented in the Rigveda, the first known Indian literary monument. 2. Art and sculpture remains. 3. The fact that Dravidian languages are preserved in this region, in particular, among the Brahui, the Oraon, and the Maltese nations, a significant role of these languages, which are now used to decipher Harappan manuscripts. 4. An outstanding position given to the mother goddess in Harappan cities. Dravidians are descendants of the Harappan civilization, people that were driven out of the Indus Valley to the south of India as a result of Aryan invasions. This corresponds with Dravidian legends, according to which prosperous cities were either ruined or destroyed in ancient times. There is both an ethnic group of Dravidians and a group of Dravidian languages. Hair of straight or wavy texture, combined with African physical features, is one of the characteristics of this ethnic group. More than 100 million people speak Dravidian languages, mainly in southern India. These include Tamil, it is spoken most of all by the people of this group, Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu, Tula. At least in the 3rd century AD there were 3 Dravidian kingdoms in southern India, Pandya, Chera and Cholas. There was a city of Madurai in the kingdom of Pandya, and in Madurai there was Sangam Academy. It was established by 48 extremely educated scientists who set standards for all literary works without exception. Pandya's rulers honored them. Also, women held a high position in this kingdom. This was exactly the opposite to those regions of India where white people ruled. It is believed that in those areas where Aryans ruled, a woman never became independent. According to the legend, as a child, she belonged to her father. When grown up and married, she belonged to her husband. If she outlived her husband, she belonged to her sons. At the same time, an ancient queen of Pandya, for example, ruled an army with 500 elephants, 4,000 cavalry units and 13,000 infantrymen. More details on the differences between the two polar civilizations will be given later in this chapter. It is believed that the kingdom of Chola is the place where the Apostle Thomas is buried. When visiting Pandya, Marco Polo spoke of Chola that it was the best and the most perfect area of all India. 109. Dravidians were very progressive sailors, and Chola became one of the predominant sea nations of the whole era. Through its ports, kings of Chola traded with Ethiopia and Somalia, Iran and Arabia, Cambodia and China, Sumatra and Sri Lanka, exporting spices and camphor, ebony, wood and ivory. high-quality fabrics and precious stones. The Dravidian kingdoms and Dravidians were well known on international arena. So, when Octavian Augustus, 63 BC to 14 AD, headed the Roman Empire, the Dravidian kingdom sent a delegation to congratulate him. According to Dravidian poets, Roman ships brought archers' bodyguards to fight pirates, and Dravidian kings hired Roman soldiers to join the bodyguards. In 1288 and 1293, Italian traveler Marco Polo visited the kingdom of Pandia. According to his descriptions, a person with the darkest skin was valued above all there and was considered to be better than the others who were not so dark. They portrayed their gods and idols as black, and demons as white as snow, claiming that God and all saints had black skin and demons had white. 109. One of the most famous Africans in India was Malik Ambar, 1549 to 1626 AD, born in Ethiopia. Like a number of other Africans in medieval India, he rose to a position of great influence. He formed a huge army, was an excellent diplomat and administrator, becoming the prime minister of the Ahmadnagar Sultanate. He stimulated production and built mosques, a system of canals for urban water supply, founded the city of Aurangabad. He initiated issuance of pensions to scientists and poets, established postal service, becoming one of the most famous people in India. Today in southern Asia there is a racial ethnic group Sidi or Habsi, which is African by origin and predominantly Negroid. It was formed in the 8th–19th centuries as a result of India's traditional trade ties with Ethiopia and the Middle East, Arab conquests in the north of the region, and subsequent Arab and Portuguese slave trade. Previously, they were called Sides, that is, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. The term Habsi comes from the Arabic name of Ethiopia. Sidi played a big role in the Deccan Wars between the Indian Maratha nation and the Mughal Empire, which was located on the territory of India. A famous Berber traveler, Ibn Battuta, 1304–1377 AD, describes Sidi as guarantors of security in the Indian Ocean, if at least one of them is on a ship. Indian pirates and idolaters will not approach the ship. 111. Thus, we were able to see the influence of black people on civilization in the Indus Valley. And in conclusion of the chapter, let's pay attention to an amazing role of Africans in creation of Eastern religions. Africans created the main Eastern religions. Anthropologist C.A. Diop highlighted two poles of civilization in ancient times: Southern, created by black people, and Northern, created by white people. In addition to their racial characteristics, there were also corresponding cultural differences. The southern cradle of civilization, which has its roots in Africa, was characterized by matriarchal family structure, equality of women and men in everyday life, creation of a territorial state, interest in everything foreign as opposed to local, whether it was manners, styles, or nations, international worldview, and a kind of social collectivism that guaranteed security of rights for everyone. From a moral point of view, they had ideals of peace, justice, goodness, and an optimistic point of view devoid of the concept of guilt or original sin. As for matriarchy, it was a well-balanced and harmonious dualism, which was defended by representatives of both sexes. Regardless of gender, everyone could fully develop by engaging in activities that suited more to physiological characteristics of a person. The northern cradle of civilization, on the other hand, was characterized by a patriarchal family, city-states outside of which a person was outlawed, fear and hostility towards unfamiliar things, individualism, moral and material isolation, pessimistic perception of existence itself. The northern cradle introduced cremation, while in the southern cradle they practiced burials of the dead. 112. C.A. Diop described civilizations of Western Asia, some of which we have reviewed, and Byzantium as zone of fusion of these two polar civilizations. Sumerians called nomadic white tribes Martu, who do not have any idea about grains. Martu, who do not have houses and cities, dim-witted people who came from the mountains, do not know how to cultivate land, eat raw meat, do not have a home throughout their life, and who even after death do not get a proper burial. 113. And although ancient Indian literature of Aryans indicates that Aryan invaders discovered black barbarians in India, archaeological research in the Indus Valley conducted by John Marshall (1876–1958) and later by Ernest Mackay (1880–1943) showed the opposite. It was discovered that before the arrival of white tribes, a race with a complex civilization and a high level of culture that was equal and in some respects superior to the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt 116 flourished in this region. Nevertheless, by 800 BC Aryans have already seized territories from Pakistan to the Indo-Gangetic Plain. They called their new possessions Aryavarta, abode of Aryans. During this era, called by historians the Vedic civilization, foundations of Hinduism were formed. In particular, the following two institutions of public life were established. The first one was called Sati, and depicted an extreme patriarchal system of life, according to which a widow was to be burned along with her deceased spouse. The second one was called Jati, or Varna, and depicted a caste-like racial system of society. Varna is literally translated as color. The last fourth, Varna, composed of servants, was called Shudra, identified in religious mythology with black color. They performed the hardest work, and it was believed that Lord Brahma had created them from his feet. At the end of 6th century BC, Buddhism, which, in particular, protested against Hinduism, appears. Buddhism denies the caste system, and therefore it is not surprising that in the areas of India where black people were massively settled, it quickly acquired masses of followers. CADA points out a possibility that the Buddha was an Egyptian priest who left Egyptian Memphis because of Persian invasion. This theory is confirmed by images of the Buddha with frizzy hair. Subsequently, during the rise of Hinduism, following the decline of Buddhism, the simple, uncomplicated system of four varnas grew into a complex multi-layered jati system, which established a strict order of alternation and correlation of different social groups. Also, a general agreement exists that in the 6th century BC not only Buddhism was formed but also the entire religious and philosophical movement in Asia, Confucius in China, Zarathustra in Iran. This confirms a hypothesis of dispersion of Egyptian priests spreading their doctrines in Asia. 43. Finally, there was the ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, who also lived around 600 BC. According to a book called Human Origins, he was described as black. Ancient Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily stated that astronomical knowledge of Babylonians was brought by a colony of Egyptian priests. 115. So, in this chapter the reader could get acquainted with the monumental influence that black people had on the development of Asian civilizations. In the next chapter, we will look at how Africans brought civilization to ancient Europe. 1. The Mongoloid race is probably the result of extensive blending of white and black people on a very early stage of human history. 2. Japanese are partly Asian Negroes. 3. To have bravery, a samurai had to have a little black blood in him. 4. Black Sakano Notomo Maro was characterized in Japanese history as an example of martial valor. 5. Most of the population of present-day China genetically has African roots. 6. First states in Southeast Asia were established by black people. 7. Sumerians were black migrants from the Nile Valley. 8. Black people created the Phoenician civilization in the Mediterranean Sea. 9. Ancient inhabitants of India were black. 10. There is a possibility that key religious and philosophical ideas were brought to Asia by Africans. 1. What does the discovered sequence of population settlement in the world indicate? 1. Asians have African roots. 2. Europeans and Asians have African roots. 3. Representatives of the so-called Mongoloid and Europeoid races do not relate to the Negroid race. 1. Who were the creators of civilization in India? 1. Aryans, that is, Indo-Europeans. 2. Black people. 3. Mix of white and black people. 2. 1. What unique features of African communities were present in ancient Asia? 1. Matriarchal system. 2. Religious mythology and architecture of structures 2-3. Both A and B are correct. 3-4. None. 1. 1. In which states do the findings indicate the rule of black dynasties? 1. Khmer states. 2-2. Sumer, China and Khmer states. 3-3. There are none. 1. Results of the test for assessment. Less than 7 points. Unfortunately, you are rather poorly informed about the presence of African elements in the first civilizations of Asia. Thus, even if you have an understanding that ancient Asians were radically superior to Europeans in their development, you do not interconnect African and Asian civilizations. You possess a worldview that glorifies Indo-Europeans as creators of everything great in this world. You should reconsider this position using the arguments given in this book. 7 to 10 points. Not bad. You note the existing similarities among the civilizations that developed in ancient Africa and Asia. Based on this, you have the opportunity to dig deeper into causes of these similarities in order to clarify the fundamental role of Africans in the development of civilization in the Asian region. 11 to 12 points. Great. You are able to critically reconsider your worldview and logically follow the existing facts. This shows your openness to the true state of affairs. This will allow you not only to study this book for yourself but also to spread this information among others. Practical assignments. 1. Conduct a research on who introduced the division of people by race and what classifications were offered. 2. Why do scientists use the Bible as one of the arguments in their anthropological theories? 3. Why, on your opinion, do people of one race look alike? 4. Development of what components of civilization was initiated in Asian states with clear presence of black people? Chapter 3. Africans are the original cause of European civilization. Now, dear reader, we will move directly to the contribution of Africans to European civilization. Let us begin with ancient Europe, where Africans brought civilization as such. Crete is a channel of spread of civilization from Africa to Europe. The first European civilization was founded on the island of Crete. It was called the Minoan culture, in honor of Minos, the mythical king of Crete. Ancestors of Cretans were a branch of Western Ethiopians, originally from Africa. They lived on the meadows of North Africa, until the region dried out and turned into a vast desert. When the sands of the Sahara intruded into their homeland, they sailed into the sea and founded a coastal culture on Crete and other neighboring islands. Point 2. British archaeologist Arthur Evans, 1851–1941, the first person to prove the existence of the Minoan civilization, noted that the influence of culture came to Crete from the Libyan Sea, the part of the Mediterranean Sea located between the southern coast of Crete and North Africa, even before the start of dynasties' rule in Egypt. This Oxford graduate was convinced that Africans had migrated to ancient Crete, and that residents of the Nile Valley had inhabited southern Crete, as indicated by many ties between them. Numerous matches found in tombs of Cretans and pre-dynastic Egypt inhabitants. 122. Historian Henry Hall, also an Oxford graduate, shared Evans's position and indicated that those Cretans that had sailed from the coast of Africa had brought seeds of civilization that evolved into the great Minoan civilization, a younger and more prominent, although less long-living, sister of the Egyptian civilization. 123. He noted that not only similarities of material culture of the two states indicated ancient relations between Crete and Egypt, but also similarities of their religions, the double-axe religious emblem, the Cretan figure-8 shield, similar to the sword of Neith, the African goddess of hunting and war. 124. Worship of this goddess was linked to the matriarchal system of ancient Africa. And similarly, Crete also had the matriarchal system, particularly superiority of a female goddess and important position of Cretan women, as proven by their apartments and gnosis and images on walls. 125. Archaeologist Veer Gordon Childe, 1892–1957, commenting on the relationship between Crete and pre-dynastic Egypt, also singled out the Masara Plain, in the southern part of Crete, as a place of spread of civilization from Africa. Forms of ancient Cretan stone vases. Precision of stone engraving technique and aesthetic choice of a variety of stones reflect African traditions. Such religious customs of Crete as, for example, using a sistrum, an Egyptian musical instrument, wearing amulets in the form of legs, mummies, monkeys, statues of the Egyptian Gurza culture. Personal habits and garments were originally characteristic of the civilization in the Nile Valley. 126. During the rule of Egyptian monarchs Motkar Hatshepsut 1490–1489–1468 BC, and Thutmose III 1481–1425 BC. Cretans, whom the Egyptians called Keftiu, were graphically depicted on tombs of African nobility as if bringing them tribute. 4. Around 1700 BC the Minoan civilization reached its peak. This region, managed by Cretan maritime rulers from the capital Knossos, became the cultural center of the entire eastern Mediterranean. The main cradles of culture and civilization were so-called palaces, complex economic and political complexes, the largest of which were in Knossos, Fest, Zakros and Tilis. None of the palaces had fortifications. Apparently, the islanders felt perfectly safe. Kings of Crete were accommodated at Minos's palace in Knossos. It was a huge 5-story building located on the territory of over 1.5 hectares. The walls of numerous rooms were decorated with beautiful murals and mosaics, showing a high level of art. A throne room, a chapel, storerooms, living quarters, and entertainment halls were located there. Minos's palace had bathrooms fitted with terracotta bathtubs and gutters. It was a real revelation for the archaeologists who discovered them. These gutters were constructed of tubes connected by couplings. This surpassed all the analogues in ancient Rome that we know of. Moreover, till the mid-19th century, this level of sewage development wasn't surpassed. This shows us greatness of the African civilization. Europeans needed a long time to reach the same level. Crete was filled with attractive and cozy houses, well-equipped ports, and excellent paved roads. Seamen of Crete dominated the Aegean Sea and had flourishing trade ties with Egypt, Sicily, and southern Italy. Cretans had quality leisure activities like music, dancing, theatrical performances, athletic competitions and other forms of entertainment. Social life was based on gender equality, as women had the same rights and privileges as men. Cretans owned registered trademarks, unified weight and length units, sophisticated calendars based on accurate astronomical observations, and a developed writing system. Their menacing navy cleared the region of pirates and robbers. 4. In the Middle Minoan period, the influence of culture extended to mainland Greece. A natural disaster of mid-15th century BC, the Minoan eruption, caused decline of the Minoan civilization, creating preconditions for the conquest of Crete by Achans, who were half-wild Greeks. Using achievements of Cretans, Greeks were able to develop their civilization, the Cretan Mycenaean culture or the Aegean civilization. Native Cretans continued to play at least an important cultural role in Mycenaean Greece. These Greeks, who took over the Minoan civilization, became the first civilized people with white skin. As writer Joseph McCabe (1867–1955) said, 4,000 years ago, when civilization was already 1 to 2,000 years old, white people were just a bunch of half-savages on the outskirts of the civilized world. Had there been anthropologists in Egypt, Crete or Babylon at that time, they would have called white people an inferior race. 118. Indeed, inhabitants of Crete, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and western India were not white but dark-skinned. 119. The same is confirmed by anthropologist Reglan. 120. Thus, we have been able to see Africans' primary role in the European civilization. Let's see what happened next. Africans are founders of Greek culture. Crete became the link between the African civilization and Europe, represented by Aegean Greece, first in Mycenaean and then in Dorian periods. The trace of the Nile Valley civilization is seen in every field of Minoan, Mycenaean, and Dorian cultures. In architecture, the so-called Dorian columns of the Parthenon, the Doric order, were originally made in a temple complex connected to a step pyramid in Saqqara, Africa. In the field of sculpture, Kouros statues, which appeared for the first time in Greece in the 7th century BC, were modeled based on Egyptian example. This is confirmed by all historians. Moreover, it was in the 7th century BC that Greeks learned from Egyptians the art of stone processing using metallurgical tools. Until then they made only wood products. In the field of philosophy and mathematics, the first Greek scholars were Thales and Pythagoras. Both had intensive training in Egyptian temples, Thales in the late 7th century BC. And Pythagoras, in the middle of the 6th century BC. Pythagoras spent 22 years studying in 3 different Egyptian temples. He invented the term philosopher, that meant one who loves wisdom. In his teachings he reproduced the knowledge of his African teachers. His teachings on the nature of harmonics and the Pythagorean theorem itself come directly from Egypt temple teachings. A lot of Greeks, up until Roman times, studied in Egypt. Some of them are 1. Thales, a philosopher and mathematician from Miletus, a representative of Ionic natural philosophy and the founder of the Milesian school, with which the history of European science begins. Was traditionally considered the pioneer of Greek philosophy, the first of 7 sages of Greece, who laid the foundations of Greek culture and statehood. 2. Pythagoras, a philosopher, mathematician and mystic, the creator of the Pythagorean school of religion and philosophy. 3. Solon, a politician, legislator and poet, one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece. 4. Anaximenes and Anaximander, philosophers, representatives of the Milesian school of natural philosophy. 5. Eudoxus of Cnidus, a mathematician, mechanic and astronomer, who also dealt in the field of medicine, philosophy, and music, and was a famous speaker and lawyer. 6. Plato, a philosopher, Aristotle's teacher. 7. Hipparchus, an ancient Greek astronomer, mechanic, geographer and mathematician, often referred to as the greatest astronomer of antiquity. 8. Galenus, a doctor, surgeon and philosopher, who made a significant contribution to understanding of many scientific disciplines, including anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, neuroscience, philosophy, and logic. According to Herodotus, almost all Greek gods have Egyptian origin, including the 2 main Greek oracles, Dodona and Delphic oracles. 3. The above-mentioned goddess Neith was one of the first goddesses worshipped by Africans in North Africa, whose cults were traced up to 4000 BC. She was the prototype of the Greek goddess Pallas Athena. This cult was dominant not only in Lower Egypt but also in northern Libya. Therefore, its origin is often linked to this region. And Libyans, in their turn, were, first of all, Western Ethiopians, and only then, to a large extent, Berbers. This group will be considered in the next chapter. Mongolian Arabs, a small number of Jews, some Asian nations, and, as a consequence, Afro-Asians. But at some point Libya was so overall inhabited with black people that the word Libyan meant black. 138. Pelasgians, inhabitants of ancient Greece of the Neolithic period, identified Neith with Pallas Athena, the most powerful goddess of the Greek pantheon, claiming that she had been born on the shores of Lake Tritonis in Libya. 139. The same views were expressed by Plato and Herodotus, who actually traveled to North Africa and wrote that Greeks had borrowed the so-called aegis, a shield in the form of a breastplate, which they used to adorn statues of Athens, from Libyan women's clothing. Except for small details, there was no difference between them. On an image of the African goddess Isis found in Nubia, the territory of present-day Sudan, she was also wearing aegis. By the way, this very element of African garments became the basis for the expression, under the aegis, which means being under the patronage, protection of a person, or acting within an institution, organization or enterprise. To agree that we didn't even understand that in our speech we used words that mean elements of garments of ancient Africans. One of the individuals who represent Africans in Greek mythology is Memnon, who we have briefly mentioned earlier. He was an astonishing African general and a warrior king whose courage and heroism during the Greek siege of Troy become one of the most popular epics in the annals of Greek and Roman mythology. He was described as black as ebony tree, and the most handsome man of the living. 129. Quintus Smyrnaeus, an ancient Greek poet of the 4th century BC, wrote that Memnon brought countless tribes from Ethiopia, the country of black people, to support the Trojan king Priam in the fight against the coalition of all Greek city-states. 130. Among the works that describe Africa's influence on ancient Greece, we can single out the following: The Ammonian or Hamitic Origin of the Ancient Greeks, Cretans, and All the Celtic Races, 131 by Joseph Haynes; The African Origin of the Grecian Civilization, 132 by George Parker; The Negro in Greek Myth, 133 by Benjamin Azakiwa; Africa and Africans as Seen by Classical Writers, 134 by William Hansberry of Howard University. But I would like to single out the book, Stolen Legacy. The Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North Africa, commonly called Egyptians, 135 by George Granville James, published in 1954. Dr. G. James received a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Theology, and Master of Arts degrees at Durham University, England. He also received a Ph.D. in literature from the same school. After conducting research at the University of London, he received a doctorate at Columbia University, USA. Then he received teacher training in mathematics, Latin, and Greek. For 2 years he was a professor of logic and Greek language at Livingstone College in North Carolina, and later taught at the University of Arkansas. He wrote the book, Stolen Legacy. The Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North Africa, commonly called Egyptians, while working at the University of Arkansas. But there is still not a single copy of this book at the university's library. On campus there is no statue or bust dedicated to Dr. James, no memorial plaque decorating the university's walls, or any certificate informing that such a person existed. Even though this university was the first university in the South of the United States to have accepted a black student, Dr. James tragically died under mysterious circumstances shortly after the publication of the book, Stolen Legacy. To this day, no significant biography of this great person has been written. 4. So, let's discuss the conclusions Dr. James reached in his research, the subject of which is confirmed by other researches as well. For example, Professor Henri Frankfurt's The Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man, and Ancient Egyptian Religion, and The Mediterranean World in Ancient Times by Professor Eva Sanford provide similar results. It is worth starting by saying that the term Greek philosophy is wrong, because there was no such philosophy. The essence of this so-called Greek philosophy was taken from a complex religious system of sacraments, developed by ancient Egyptians. 137. This Egyptian teaching was also the first system of salvation developed by people. According to it, human body was regarded as a prison of the soul that could be freed from bodily obstacles through learning arts and sciences, and therein make a transition from mortality to the position of God. It expressed the idea of supreme goodness, to which all people should aspire, which later became the basis of many other ethical concepts. The Egyptian system of sacraments was also a secret order whose membership was acquired by admission and vow of secrecy. All newcomers were trained viva voce, according to different levels. In these conditions of secrecy, Egyptians developed encrypted writing and teaching systems and forbade the members of the order to record what they learned. After several thousand years of education banned for Greeks, they were allowed to come to Egypt for educational purposes. First, this happened after the Persian conquest of Egypt, and then, as a result of the conquest by Alexander the Great. From the 6th century BC to Aristotle's death 322 BC, Greeks did everything they could to use a chance to learn Egyptian culture. Most of them learned directly from Egyptian priests, but after they were conquered by Alexander the Great, royal temples and libraries were stolen. And Aristotle turned the Library of Alexandria into a research center. Here we see the first attempt to gain knowledge of Egyptians without recognizing their authorship. So Aristotle was said to have written himself so many books that physically no person can write in their life. Naturally, these books were based on information materials from African libraries. The next argument against Greeks having developed the philosophical knowledge for which they are celebrated, is the attitude of the Greek government towards these sciences. The government considered these teachings foreign by origin and treated them accordingly. Please note 1. Anaxagoras, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, the founder of the philosophy school of Athens, was imprisoned and exiled. 2. Socrates, a philosopher and reformer of ancient philosophy, was executed. 3. Plato was sold into slavery. 4. Aristotle, a philosopher, teacher of Alexander the Great, the founder of formal logic, was convicted and sent to exile. 5. Pythagoras was forced out of Croton, a Greek colony in southern Italy, where he had been conducting his activities. So, if we reconstruct the events that took place directly during the life of the Greeks who were considered authors of Greek philosophy, we become convinced that their teachings were borrowed, or, to say more accurately, stolen from Egyptian priests and teachers. When students of our time hear a phrase, "know yourself," they are convinced that this is a Socrates quote. In fact, in Egyptian temples there were inscriptions for beginners that read in particular, "know yourself." Socrates copied this phrase from the Egyptian temples, but was never its author. Similarly, when students nowadays hear about 4 cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, and courage, they relate them to Plato. In fact, Plato copied them from the list of 10 virtues of the Egyptian system of sacraments. For centuries, calling the theorem on the square of the hypotenuse Pythagoras' theorem was covering the truth that Pythagoras himself and other Greeks learned mathematics as such from Egyptians. Coming back to the prohibition by the Egyptian learning system to record the acquired knowledge, it is understandable that Socrates, for example, did not leave behind a written form of the disseminated teachings. Babylonians and Chaldeans, who also had close relationship with Egyptians, refrained from publishing these teachings too. But even under such circumstances, it wouldn't constitute a problem for a nation that had ambitions to appropriate the knowledge that others hadn't recorded. Greeks in a certain sense established a monopoly on main sources of wisdom. So the sacred scriptures of Jews, the Old Testament, were translated into Greek and named Septuagint. The original form of the New Testament is still called the Greek New Testament. And finally, philosophical and scientific knowledge of antiquity was conveyed in Greek language. But if authorship of the first 2 documents was not amended, knowledge of ancient Egyptians had another fate. African authors' rights were ignored. Here we have confirmed that Africans were the authors of Greek culture. Now let's look at the presence of Africans in different parts of ancient Europe. Africans inhabited the territory of present-day Europe. Scottish folklorist David McCritchie, English historian Godfrey Higgins, and Gerald Massey presented some impressive evidence of the presence of black people in the British Isles in antiquity. It is, in particular, linguistic evidence. Until the 19th century, physical residue of black people or people of near-Negroid type were found in western Great Britain. And this is notwithstanding centuries of mixing with dominant Celtics and Anglo-Saxons, who had also settled in this region. Point 3. Existence of an Egyptian Kushite colony with African population in Britain can be also proven by a reflection of African culture on Druids in the pre-Christian period. Druids were priests of ancient Celtic nations that formed a closed but not hereditary class. They also served as judges, dealt in medicine and astronomy. Researcher John Aubrey (1626–1697) attributed construction of such British megaliths like Stonehenge to Druids. David McCritchie (1851–1925) notes that Britons may be divided into 2 types by their physical characteristics: xanthochroids, with pure white skin, and melanochroids, with black hair. Concerning melanochroids, he quotes English biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, the president of the Royal Society of London and foreign correspondent of the Petersburg Academy of Sciences. Melanochroids are the result of mixing of xanthochroids and australoids. As regards to australoids, from the point of view of D. McCritchie, they include all native population of Australia, natives of the Deccan Plateau, and residents of Middle and Upper Egypt. The entire territory occupied by the descendants of ancient Egyptians. They have chocolate brown skin and a wide nose. In the 19th-20th century, Australoids were included in the Negroid race. From a cultural point of view, the Australoid element is visible in the construction of dolmens, stone circles, and pyramids, the residues of which were found throughout Great Britain and Western Europe. According to Democritus, black people were the first people in Britain. They were quickly followed by representatives of other ethnic types, such as, for example, Mongoloids. But here, too, we can trace black people. Thus, Huns, a nomadic people of Asia, who invaded Europe in the 370s, led by Attila, were descendants of a Central Asian people Xiongnu. Jordan, a Gothic historian of the 6th century, describes Huns as dark-skinned, almost black people. According to his description, Attila himself had a flat nose and dark skin. He singled out Kittites, a nomadic community of Asia, called the Black Huns. Perhaps a similar combination of racial elements was present in Silures, Celtic tribes that fiercely resisted the Roman conquest of Britain. Pay attention to the description of Silures' appearance by the Roman historian Tacitus: brown faces of Silures, their curly hair, and the fact that Spain was just opposite their coasts indicate arrival of Iberians in the old days and their occupation of these places. International significance of the Hun invasion was partly determined by far-reaching changes in the position of Anto-Slavic tribes. By destroying the power of Ostrogoths, Huns prevented the possibility of Germanization of Anto-Slavs in southern Rus. The era of Hun invasion is thus, in a sense, a period of liberation of Eastern Slavs not only from Gothic but also from Iranian control. During Attila's rule, 434–453, the Hun Union with a center in Pannonia reached maximum expansion, covering the area from the Volga and Caucasus to the Rhine. It is known that the first inhabitants of Britain, especially in its northern regions, from the point of view of craniology, a complex of scientific disciplines examining normal variations of humans and animals' skull shapes, belonged to a type similar to the Negroid and Australoid races. Although, of course, there are no Britons who would be as black as Negroes anymore, but some of them are as dark as mulattoes. Black blood flows in the veins of modern melanochoroids of Britain. 140. British Moors are a separate topic. An extensive review of what Moors were and what their achievements were will be made in the next chapter. For now, we will go with a definition of the Oxford Dictionary of English that states that from the medieval times till the 17th century, the term Moor was applied to people with black or extremely dark skin, and was often used to refer to Negroes. Democritus was absolutely convinced that Moors were a black people that played a significant role in colonization of Western Europe, especially Britain. According to his data, part of this people inhabited Britain, and they can be found not only as Moors or Moors but also as Moravians, Morants, Murrays, and Mari people. In Scotland, a number of clans and regions were or still are named Moray. In such an area, one of the castles built by Moray baronets is called the Black Baron Domain. Similarly, Professor J. Rogers notes that existence of such names indicates existence of a black ancestor, including in some noble British families. 3. One of the kings of the Kingdom of Scotland, from the 10th to the 13th century, known as the Kingdom of Alba, was Black Dub the Vehement, who was called Niger the Black. The Pictish Chronicle, which is one of the most valuable sources of ancient Scotland's history, indicates that the whole nation was divided into 7 regions and Dub ruled 3 of them. They were called Black, and were apparently populated by black people. As a result of a research of the Western Isles of Scotland in 1691, inhabitants of the Isle of Skye were described as mostly black, inhabitants of the Isle of Jura as mostly black, and the Isle of Arran inhabitants as mostly brown, and some black-skinned. 140. Historian Godfrey Higgins, 1772–1833, compared gods worshipped in the British Isles and Ireland with deities of the Mediterranean, especially of Greece and Phoenicia. Thus, the African goddess Neith, who we've already discussed, had her counterpart in Ireland, the goddess Nath. As fantastic as it seems, there are substantial grounds for believing that Africans inhabited Ireland. For example, there is a legend of African seafarers, Fomorians, whose fortress was located on Tory Island, an island in the Atlantic Ocean, off the northern coast of Ireland. 141. Historian Geoffrey Keating (1570–1644) claimed that Fomorians were descendants of Ham, the son of Noah, and were sailors from Africa. 142. According to another work, they were Carthaginians, whose African origin we have already discussed, who had established a commercial port on the coast of Western Ireland. 143. According to the legend, Fomorians fought Tuatha De Danann, the tribes of the goddess Danu. We also find the goddess Anu in Irish religious myths. She is often identified with the Irish goddess Nan and the goddess Danu, the greatest goddess and ruler of Tuatha. Anu was worshipped as the goddess of prosperity and abundance, and the mountains in Killarney, Ireland, that resemble female breasts were named in her honor. 144. In their turn, ancient Egyptians called their immediate predecessors Anud, among whom Anu Seti were residents of Nubia, living on the banks of the Nile. 146. We should also mention that the term Anud was applied to ancient inhabitants of Libya called Anu-Dahanu. Egyptians called two of their most important cities, Hermonthis and Heliopolis, Anu. The most educated Egyptians received their training there, including Moses, who, according to fragments of Manetho's works, lived in the northern Anu. 147. In Egyptian eschatology, a system of religious beliefs and perceptions of life after death, Anu was an abode of a resurrected spirit of the dead. 148. Certain Irish historical records bear evidence of a Viking raid on Spain and North Africa in 862. As a result of which a number of black people were captured and brought to Dublin, Ireland. It is believed that they were the legendary Blue People, referred to in ancient folklore. Historian Eleanor Anderson's work contains the following lines: they were Blue People, Vergorma, because Moors were like Negroes. Mauritania is also a land of Negroes, literally, with the same blackness. 164,165. Norway had a significant presence of black people. 149. Their presence in Scandinavia during the Viking Age was, inter alia, due to the fact that Carthaginians and their predecessors Phoenicians carried out regular sea journeys to this region in search of tin metal. There was always a lot of black sailors and merchants on their ships. 3. Now let's move to another region. Colchis is a land situated along the western slope of Caucasus Range, nearby eastern shores of the Black Sea on the border with Europe and Asia. It was believed that the Golden Fleece that, according to Greek mythology, Jason and Argonauts were looking for, was located there. So, the Greek historian Herodotus considered Colchis a colony of the civilization of the Nile Valley, formed in the 19th century BC during the reign of the 12th dynasty of ancient Egypt. Today, it is the territory of Georgia, Turkey, and Russia. Herodotus not only pointed to black skin and hair of Colchians, but also to their oral traditions, language, weaving methods, and circumcision practices. According to his account, Colchians, it seems, were Egyptians. I figured it out myself even before I heard it from the others. I got interested and started asking about this relation in both Colchis and Egypt. Colchians kept a clearer memory of Egyptians than Egyptians did of Colchians. Egyptians, however, told me that they believed Colchians originated from warriors of Sesostris, that is, the Egyptian army. I came to the same conclusion, because they were dark-skinned and had frizzy hair. Far more solid are the following arguments. Only 3 nations on the planet were practicing circumcision since the beginning of time: Colchians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians. Phoenicians and Syrians in Palestine recognized that they borrowed this custom from Egyptians. I'll give you another similarity between Colchians and Egyptians. Only they and Egyptians produce canvas the same way. Also their whole way of life and language are similar. 49. Historian Diodorus of Sicily was of the same opinion. In the 4th century AD, Saint Jerome, the historian and creator of the canonical Latin text of the Bible, called Colchis the Second Ethiopia. 200 years later, Sophronius, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, mentioned the presence of Ethiopians in the same region. 151 Even nowadays there is a small community of people with black skin and frizzy hair on the territory of which Herodotus used to write 153,154,155. Thus, we have discovered the presence of Africans and, consequently, their roots in modern nations of the United Kingdom, Ireland, Scandinavian countries, Georgia, and Russia. Next we will discuss direct influence that Africans had on the Roman Empire. The influence of Africans on the Roman Empire. We will now discuss direct influence of Africans on cultural life, military and political spheres of the Roman Empire. We will get acquainted with African artists, military commanders, and even Roman emperors. Publius Terentius Afer, a prominent playwright of the Roman Empire. Great African men and women had a strong influence on Roman history and culture. For example, a prominent playwright and representative of Roman comedy Publius Terentius Afer, or simply Terence 195-185-159 BC. Such immortal sayings as, "I am a human being, nothing human can be alien to me," and, "As long as there is life, there is hope," belong to him. He was originally from Carthage and belonged to an African tribe, which his nickname, Afer, indicates. After somehow getting to Rome, Terence was a slave to Senator Terentius Lucandus, who, after noticing his outstanding abilities, gave him a thorough education and then freedom. Terence's talents opened him a way to the highest circles of Roman society. The greatest success was his play, Eunuchus, which used to be performed twice a day and received prizes. After the play, The Brothers, in 160 BC, Terence made a journey to Greece, from which he never returned. He died in 159 BC, when he was 25 or 35 years old. Terence's plays were in conformity with the society in which the poet mingled, and were of much greater purity and nobility of language than comedies of Plautus, a prominent Roman comedy dramatist. Terence's style was so elegant that the poet's enemies spread rumors that Scipio and Laelius, Roman military commanders and intellectuals, helped him write his comedies. At the same time, Terence tried to avoid obscenities in his plays. His work remained very popular up until the 19th century. Even in the antiquity, Terence's comedies were studied in schools and became a domain of grammarians, who wrote different interpretations to them. Interest in Terence did not disappear in the Middle Ages. In the 9th century, his comedies were read by Alcuin, a scientist, theologian and poet. The most important inspirational figure of the Carolingian Renaissance, at court banquets of Charles the Great. In the Age of Reformation, Erasmus, a German writer and poet, strongly recommended Terence for his language, and Melanchthon, a German humanist, theologian and educator, recommended him for proper development of his characters. Martin Luther, a Protestant theologian of the German Reformation, himself not only often quoted Terence but also recommended his comedies for teaching children in schools. Terence had influence on Molière, a French playwright of the 17th century and creator of classical comedy, the great Shakespeare, and Spanish playwright Cervantes. Many translations of Terence's works were made by G. Coleman, an English playwright and essayist. Danish artist Nikolai Abildgaard painted a series of large-size paintings illustrating Terence's play, Andrea. And a three-time Pulitzer Prize-winning American playwright Thornton Wilder wrote his novel, The Woman of Andros, based on the same play. In Russia, Archbishop Theophan Prokopovich, a primary member of the Russian Orthodox Church Synod, statesman, writer and collaborator of Peter the Great when teaching in the Kiev Academy, told Russian Messrs. Molières, "Those who want to write comedy should imitate Terence." In antiquity, Julius Caesar and Cicero praised his plays. Horace Persius and Tacitus were closely acquainted with Terence. Just imagine how many outstanding achievements this African made in such a short life. Some 350 years later, another distinguished African lived, Lucius Apuleius, a Roman writer and poet, Platonist, philosopher, reader, author of a famous novel, Metamorphoses, the Golden Ass. He was born in Madaris, the territory of present-day Algeria, North Africa. Blessed Augustine, who himself studied in Mataoros, mentions Apuleius in his work, The City of God, and certain letters calling him an African, the most famous of our Africans. Pushkin wrote, when a Lyceum lad, I flourished, and roamed its gardens at my ease, on Apuleius gladly nourished, while Cicero could scarcely please Eugene Onegin. Chapter 8. Metamorphoses ends with a tale of a hero also called Lucius, rescued by African goddess Isis, who was worshipped by Apuleius himself. Point 4. Hannibal Barca, African father of military strategy. Romans called northwestern Africa, Mauritania, and its inhabitants, Moors. Based on Greek and Roman sources. Professor Frank Martin Snowden of Howard University, 1911–2007, noted that Moors were described as black and burnt. 157 Roman playwright Plautus 254–184 BC insisted that the word Moor was synonymous with the term Negro. 158 A more detailed review of Moors will be carried out in the next chapter. For the first time, we see reference to Moorish warriors during military conflicts between Rome and Carthage. They are also mentioned during an expedition to Sicily in 406 BC, during the Carthage uprising of Hanno the Great, about 350 BC. And the Roman invasion of Africa in 256 BC 166. In addition, Roman historian Titus Livius refers to them in his description of the Second Punic War 218–201 BC. 167. During a long, bitter and desperate struggle for independence and control over the western Mediterranean, Carthaginians engaged the Moor armies in all their military campaigns. Together with Numidians, inhabitants of North Africa, they fought on Carthaginian side against Romans. These fearsome Mauritanian warriors gave a lot of help to Carthaginians, especially to African general Hannibal Barca 247–183 BC, a Carthaginian military commander. Some 6,000 Moors were under his command, and only when they were already unavailable, he suffered his only defeat. 168. Hannibal made a significant contribution to the development of martial arts. Hannibal's strategy is characterized by the following elements. 1. Ability to properly assess the military and political situation and to exploit tensions in the enemy's camp. 2. Taking care of the rear of the army. 3. Ensuring sustainability of communications and supply bases. 4. A careful organization of intelligence and extensive research of the battlefield and theater of war. 5. A detailed preparation and procurement of prolonged passages of troops. The main force of the army Hannibal considered to be troops on the ground, whose main strength was cavalry. Hannibal's tactics have the following characteristics. 1. Good knowledge of the enemy and ability to use their weaknesses. 2. Careful preparation for the battle. 3. Courageous maneuvering the forces and ambition to completely destroy the enemy. 4. Skillful use of element of surprise and new modes of action. 5. Taking into account characteristics of the terrain. The Battle of Cannes is the pinnacle of Hannibal's generalship. It became a new stage in the development of tactics. The first example of encirclement of a large enemy's army and its total destruction. He is considered one of the greatest military strategists in the history of Europe, as well as one of the greatest warlords of antiquity, alongside Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Scipio, and Pyrrhus of Epirus. The military historian Theodore Herodotus named Hannibal the father of strategy, because his enemies Romans had borrowed a number of strategic elements from him. Such an assessment created for him a strong reputation in the modern world, and he is considered a great strategist, alongside Napoleon Bonaparte. The Jugurthian War 112–105 BC was initiated by nationalist fervency of another North African patriot Jugurtha. Conducting ruthless partisan war, he became a formidable adversary to his enemies, inflicting embarrassing defeats on the Roman legions. Archaeologist Graham Webster writes that Jugurtha's battles showed the value of nimble Mauritanian riders, who therefore were later used by Emperor Traianus against Asians. 169. African warlords of the Roman army. Later, Moors were actively employed for military service by the Roman Empire and accommodated in Britain, France, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Romania, and Poland. Many of these Africans reached high rank. An official Roman state document dating from the 2nd century AD mentions Moorish soldiers in Moesia, the territory of present-day Serbia. Another similar document from 158 tells about Moorish soldiers from Africa in Dacia, present-day Romania. A Roman document, Notitia Dignitatum, list of positions dating the beginning of the 5th century, refers to several Moorish battalions in the Balkans. A Moorish military colony, Admaros, on the Inn River near Vienna, Austria, and the city of Morakastrum, present-day Bilhorodnistrovsky, Ukraine. Also, according to this document, between 2,500 and 5,000 Illyrian Moorish soldiers served in the Middle East as a part of 5 separate military units. On this basis, it can be concluded that at the beginning of the 5th century at least 100,000 descendants of Moors lived in Illyricum, the territory of the present-day Balkan Peninsula. 170. African Lucius Quietus became a Roman military commander in the time of Emperors Domitian and Trajan, who called him his successor. Trajan died in 117, and next year Lucius Quietus was killed. This may have been done on the orders of Emperor Hadrian, who feared the popular general. Being purely of African origin, he was described as a man of the Moorish race and the most capable soldier of the Roman army. Trajan's Column in Rome, created by the architect Apollodorus of Damascus in 113 AD in honor of Trajan's victories over the tribes of Dacians, depicts Moorish cavalry under the command of Lucius fighting with Dacians. 1598 Terracotta head, another work of that period, was found, and it looked very similar to heads of the cavalry depicted on Trajan's Column, described by archaeologists as the head of a Negro or a Moor. The other Roman military and political figure was an African Quintus Lollius Urbicus. He was the one who conquered most of Scotland for the Roman Empire and built a 58 km long Antonine Wall, which was the northwestern border of the Roman Empire. He was a member of the Roman Senate, a people's tribune and a praetor. He received a spear and a golden crown as a military award, and ruled the province of Lower Germany. Urbicus built Coria, present-day Corbridge, near Newcastle. In 146–160 he was the prefect of Rome. A prefect was a Roman official who was appointed to rule Rome in the absence of consuls or the emperor. 4. Consul of Numidia, North Africa, Xenophilus bragged about his grandfather, that he was a soldier serving in the imperial entourage because he was a Moor. 172. African Roman emperors. It is striking that Africans could even become Roman emperors. The Severan dynasty was a dynasty of Roman emperors in 193–235. The forefather of this dynasty was Septimius Severus 146–211, born in Africa, in a former Phoenician colony Leptis Magna, the territory of present-day Libya. Despite his Roman education, he spoke Latin with an African accent till the end of his life. After the death of Marcus Aurelius and his son Commodus's ascent to power, Septimius showed himself as commander of a Roman legion in Syria. And in 193 Severus was proclaimed the emperor by his loyal troops. However, in Rome praetorians literally conducted an auction and put a wealthy Roman Didius Iulianus on the emperor's throne. After that Septimius took his legions to Italy, which surrendered to him without any resistance. The 18-year-long rule of Septimius Severus was marked by a series of important internal reforms that significantly advanced transition from principate to monocracy. He was able to stop rampant corruption, which was widespread at the time of Emperor Commodus. The emperor's main backbone was the army, so their salaries were increased, centurions were assigned to horsemen, veterans received various privileges, and soldiers were allowed to marry while in service. The emperor had tremendous games and gifts to win people over. In Septimius's time, the first mapping of Rome was made, fragments of which have reached us. He enlarged Rome and decorated it with various magnificent buildings. Being a countryman himself, Septimius especially favored the provinces, in particular Dacia, Africa, and the East. Septimius Severus tried to equalize Italy with the other regions. To avoid the danger of concentration of too many troops in one place, he divided large provinces into districts. After defeating Parthians, he erected the Triumphal Arch of Septimius Severus, located in the Roman Forum. It is considered one of the most important triumphal arches of Italy. They say he even built a marble tomb for the African warlord Hannibal Barca, a sworn enemy of Rome. Because of his African origin, Septimius was called the Revenge of Hannibal. In addition, he built the Septizodium, an antique monumental fountain in Rome, and most of the Flavian Palace, which faces the Circus Maximus. After Septimius, his son Caracalla became the emperor, 188–217. His official name was Emperor Caesar Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Augustus. During his rule, abundant administrative reforms took place, salaries of soldiers and their rights were increased. But the most important thing is that Roman citizenship was given to all free residents of the empire. A triumphal arch in Volubilis, the territory of Morocco, was erected in honor of Caracalla. In Rome he built thermae, antique baths that are still one of Rome's main attractions. After that, Mauritanian Marcus Macrinus 164–218 took the throne for 1 year. He was later replaced by Heliogabalus 204–222, the next representative of the Severan dynasty. The rule of Alexander Severus 208–235 ends the rule of this dynasty. He is responsible for erection of the Triumphal Arch in Douga, Tunisia. He also restored the Baths of Nero, which were then named after him, the Baths of Alexander. The Colosseum was restored thanks to him. Alexander was a freethinker in matters of religion, and it is believed he wanted to build a temple of Jesus, but pagan priests changed his mind. This distinguishes him, for example, from Septimius, as during his rule Christians were brutally persecuted. Alexander decided to build a synagogue in Rome, and for the synagogue he gave a scroll known as the Severus Scroll, which included passages from the Torah, the Pentateuch. Under the influence of his mother, Alexander did a great deal to improve the morals and living conditions of the people and to enhance the dignity of the state. He engaged leading jurists to monitor the administration of justice. He created a 14-person municipal council to assist in management of 14 districts of Rome. Excessive luxury and waste in the imperial court were also reduced. Taxes were reduced, development of literature, arts and science was promoted. Also institutions providing loans with a moderate interest rate were established, for people's convenience. Soldiers were able to choose their own heirs, release their slaves by their wills. Soldiers' rights to protect private property for the time of their absence due to service were asserted. The Senate then deified Alexander Severus in 238. There is also surviving data about Marcus Aemilius Aemilianus, a Roman emperor from 253. According to a source of the 4th century, a booklet about the style of life and the manners of the imperatores, he was a Moor. In 251–252 the Emperor Trebonianus Gallus granted him the rank of the governor of Moesia and Pannonia at the same time. And after Marcus's victory over the Goths his army declared him the emperor. 171. Thus, we have discovered the influence of Africans on the Roman Empire, the influence of a spectacular scale. And to end this chapter we will address the issue of the discovery of America by Africans long before Columbus, because today America is very closely linked to Europe. Africans discovered America and developed American civilization. The first civilization on the territory of America, South and North America, was the Olmec civilization. Olmecs were an ancient nation of Mesoamerica, located on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. This ancient American culture is considered to be the first civilization in the Western Hemisphere, as they surpassed their neighbors in their attempt to solve a number of issues of cohabitation, government, defense, religion, family, property, science, and art. As a result of this attempt, Olmecs laid the foundation of the classical Mesoamerican civilization. We cannot say with full certainty where Olmecs came from, or whether they were direct descendants of the native population. But many of their sculptures, especially giant heads, point to a clear and undeniable presence of Africans on American territory in antiquity. According to Professor Ivan van Sertima of Rutgers University in the United States, the Olmec civilization was not an African colony. But Africans were a small top-class community with a lot of influence among Olmecs. 161. At the same time, Aztec wise men told Spanish monks again. A long time ago, in times that no one remembers, there was one mighty nation in these lands. Before that, people wandered for a long time in search of the promised land. First, in large numbers they arrived on their boats to the north shore. And the place where they left their boats is called Pinula, present-day city on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, in the northern part of Veracruz state. They started moving along the water's edge. They moved not in their own free will. They were guided by priests, and God showed them the way. Finally, they reached Tamarangin land and founded their kingdom. Norwegian researcher Thor Heyerdahl proved similarities between Egyptian and Olmec civilizations. 1. Pyramids. 2. A highly developed system of hieroglyphic writing. 3. Similarities of fresco paintings in temples and tombs. 4. Similar temple designs and subtle megalithic colonnades. 5. Existence of cyclopic human figures made of stone. 6. Amazing knowledge in astronomy and a highly developed calendar system in Mexico and Egypt. 7. Incredibly perfect practice of trephination of human skull. 8. A similar Egyptian-Peruvian custom of mummification. Thus, he indicated the influence that centers of culture, that appeared in Africa and spread in other regions, had on pre-Columbian America. In addition, he noted that scientists did not detect the evolutionary development of American culture, but that the ancient American civilization was, on the basis of the available data, introduced from the outside. So he himself conducted an experiment and built a boat of papyrus, based on an ancient Egyptian model that had been acquired in Ethiopia and had come from Africa through the Atlantic Ocean to Barbados, close to South American continent. By doing so, he proved that in prehistoric times African seafarers had been able to make transatlantic journeys into the New World through the Canary Current. In 1869, a note by J.M. Melgar appeared in the Bulletin of the Mexican Geographical and Statistical Society. He stated that in 1862, on sugar cane plantation near Tres Zapotes village, Veracruz, he had been fortunate to discover an amazing sculpture, not like any other known until then. The head of an African, carved out of stone. The note had an illustration. In 1871, Melgar declared, "I am absolutely convinced that Negroes went to these lands more than once, even in the first era of creation of the world." The Olmec civilization flourished on the territory of present-day Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco. The culmination of its development was a 800-year period, from 1200 to 400 BC. In Levante, one of its centers, the so-called Big Pyramid, was found 33 meters high. It was the largest building in the city. Africans dramatically entered into a crucial period of this Mesoamerican civilization. A series of 17 giant stone heads with strong African features stand out most of all. The largest of them weighs 40 tons. According to archaeologist Matthew Sterling, who conducted crucial excavations of this civilization, they are images of the most outstanding Olmec leaders and rulers perpetuated in stone. One of them was called the head of an Ethiopian. Perhaps the depicted Africans were rulers or royal priesthood, or they were worshipped as gods. In all of this, it is important that Africans ended up in the Western Hemisphere, neither as a thing or property, nor as a commodity or slaves, but as masters, in control of their own destiny. The Olmec civilization is universally regarded as the pioneer civilization of America. Beginning around 1500 BC, it existed until the beginning of the Christian era. It had a profound impact on all subsequent civilizations, including Maya, Totonac, Zapotec, and Aztec. Olmecs were the first in America to transport huge stone objects, to use the calendar, to build pyramids, to practice astronomy. They even had organized sport. 162. They were able to install a large basalt lump, a stone head, in Tres Zapotes. Although the nearest deposit of such stone was several dozen kilometers away. Such a task would have bewildered even modern engineers, while Olmecs did this without the help of wheeled transport and draft animals, since they had none. Based on writings found by archaeologists, a strong conclusion was reached that Mayan priests had borrowed their incredibly accurate calendar from their western neighbors Olmecs. The first plumbing of America was discovered. It was a U-shaped drainage system, which successfully operated at the time of discovery, having been built 3,000 years earlier. In addition, it is to be noted that even when Columbus discovered America for Europeans, Africans did not sail to America in slave shackles. Africans participated in early expeditions of Spaniards to the territory of present-day United States of America. The most famous of them was Estevanico, who discovered for Europeans rich lands of present-day Arizona and New Mexico. Africans accompanied Columbus, Vasco de Balboa, who founded the first European city in America, and Fernando Cortés, who conquered Mexico. So, in this chapter, the reader was able to discover some amazing facts. Africans brought civilization to Europe, fundamentally influenced the culture of ancient Greece, inhabited the territory of various European states, had a cultural, military and political influence on the Roman Empire, and also discovered America long before Europeans and had an impact on its civilization. In the next chapter we will look at the greatest civilization of medieval Europe founded by black people. Fundamental truths. The first European civilization was founded on the island of Crete. Africans brought the seeds of civilization that grew into the great Minoan civilization. Moreover, till the mid-19th century, the level of sewage development on Crete Island was not surpassed. Social life of Crete was based on gender equality. Cretans owned registered trademarks, had unified weight-length units. Greeks, who took over the Minoan civilization, became the first civilized people with white skin. Crete became a link between the African civilization and Europe, represented by Aegean Greece. The trace of the Nile Valley civilization is seen in every field of the Minoan, Mycenaean, and Dorian cultures. According to Herodotus, almost all Greek gods have Egyptian origin. The essence of the so-called Greek philosophy was taken from a complex religious system of sacraments developed by ancient Egyptians. The evidence point to the presence of Africans in ancient Britain, Ireland, Australia, Scandinavia, Georgia, Turkey, and Russia. Great African men and women had a strong influence on Roman history and culture. Historians call the African warlord Hannibal the father of strategy. Africans were warlords in the Roman Empire. Africans were Roman emperors. Africans discovered America long before Columbus. An elite group of Africans was present in America's pioneer civilization. Self-assessment test. 1. Which place was the cradle of the first civilization of Europe? 1. Europe itself. 1. 2. Asia. 2. 3. Africa. 3. 1. What elements of Greek culture were taken from Africans? 1. Architecture and sculpture. 2. 2. Philosophy and mathematics. 2. 3. Both A and B are correct. 3. 4. None. 1. 1. What spheres of life of the Roman Empire were influenced by Africans? 1. Military. 2. 2. Political and cultural. 2. 3. None. 1. 4. Both A and B are correct. 3. 1. In what capacity did the first Africans arrive to America? 1. Slaves. 1. 2. Uneducated migrants. 2. 3. A highly developed and top-class group. 3. Results of the test for assessment. Less than 7 points. Unfortunately, you have no knowledge of African influence on the creation of civilization in the Western world. It is most common for you to consider African continent an outsider to whom mercy was shown by bringing them education. You are not aware of the historical sequence of civilization development and of the fundamental role of the African civilization. It will be extremely useful for you to get acquainted with the work of Dr. G. James, Stolen Legacy, 135 and Sheikh Anta Diop's book, African Origin of Civilization. 43. 7 to 10 points. Not bad. You are not inclined to idealize the role of Europeans in the development of Western civilization. You are aware of some African achievements that shaped the development of European civilization. However, you lack completely objective information in this regard. It would be useful for you to discover a complete basis of civilization given to Europe by Africans. 11 to 12 points. Great. You adequately assess the role of African influence on key ancient states of Europe and have extensive information about spread of Africans' achievements to the European continent. It might be interesting for you to discover more milestones of the history of Europe, where black people had decisive influence, in the following chapters. 1. Why is it remarkable that the Negroid elements found in America were found exactly on giant structures of Olmecs? 2. What conclusions can be drawn from the fact that Romans borrowed strategic elements from African Hannibal Barca? 3. What does the fact that an African dynasty ruled as Roman emperors say? 4. Why did the place on the opposite side of the African coast become the first civilization of Europe? 5. What changes in the perception of Africans are caused by the fact that they were the authors of Greek culture?